Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first of two public hearings that we're having tonight. I will call the public hearing to order. These public hearings are being held pursuant to Section 465 of the Local Government Act. All members of the public will be given a reasonable time to be heard or to present written submissions respecting matters contained in the bylaws that are the subject of these hearings. All information, correspondence, petitions, or reports that have been received by noon today concerning the subject bylaws have been circulated to Council and are available to the public as part of the meeting package. For each public hearing, staff will provide their report, followed by an opportunity for the applicant to speak. Members of the public who have pre-registered to speak have been added to the speakers list in the order that requests were received. I will provide an opportunity for public comment according to the speakers list, followed by comment from those who have not pre-registered. Anyone who has not pre-registered can still attend council chambers, as some people are here, and wait to speak following those on the speakers list, or alternatively can electronically participate by calling the conference line during the live hearing at 778-907-2071 and entering meeting ID 506-489-9374 and passcode 485186. Speakers will be asked to state their name and civic address. Please note that all representations, whether written, in person, or electronic, are available to the public for viewing as part of the public record. Remarks will be limited to 5 minutes per presenter and should include all of the relative information. Further opportunity will be afforded to all members of the public to speak a second or third time with new information only once all persons have had an opportunity to speak. Council may ask questions of staff, the applicant, and the public, but once the public hearings are over, no new information can be received. Council debate on the bylaws will take place during the regular council meeting following the conclusion of the public hearings. The corporate officer will now provide information on the notice of these two public hearings.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So notice of the public hearing was given by posting on the public notice board at Municipal Hall, on the district's website, and in the Summerland review editions of May 5th, April 28th, and May 5th. In addition, for public hearing number 1, 12 notices were mailed to area owners and occupiers on April 22nd, 2022. And for public hearing number 2, 16 notices were mailed to owners and occupiers on April 22nd, 2022.
Thank you. So we'll go to the official community plan. This is public hearing number 1. Official community plan and zoning bylaw amendment for 13316 Prairie Valley Road, Z20-013.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So official community plan amendment bylaw number 2021-015 and zoning amendment bylaw number 2021-016 seek site-specific amendment for 13316 Prairie Valley Road. The current OCP future land use designation of the subject property is agricultural, and its zone is currently agricultural small acreage A1, as shown here. The property abuts the agricultural land reserve to the east, west, and south, shown in green on the map here. And to the north, it abuts the urban growth area boundary, shown in white. There are 2 amendment bylaws related to this property for this public hearing today. The OCP amendment would extend the urban growth area identified in our official community plan, which is shown here, to include the subject property. So the existing urban growth area and the proposed change are shown in white on the map there. It would also change the OCP future land use designation from agricultural to low-density residential intensification, as shown on the map there. The OCP outlines considerations for making changes to the urban growth boundary, and these considerations include affordability and efficiency of a utility extension, proximity to an urban node, so a place with amenities and services, proximity to recreational amenities like parks and trails, the impact to the natural environment, and the community need for the proposed development. The second amendment bylaw related to this property is the change of zoning designation. So this amendment would be seeking to change the existing zoning from A1 to RSD1I, which is the low density residential intensification zone. In the OCP, low density residential intensification is to encourage a redevelopment and infill of fully serviced sites within a 5-minute walk of public amenities. And the criteria in the OCP to assess the appropriateness of a new designation is based on visual impacts to neighbors like privacy and sunlight, walkability, and tree retention. The RSD1I zone is a residential zone and has a smaller minimum lot area and width requirements for subdivision than the existing A1 zoning. So just shown here is the comparison. So minimum lot area under existing zoning is 2 hectares. Under the proposed zoning, it would be 360 square meters with smaller lots allowed under density bonusing. In comparison, the two zones, the A1 and the RSD1I, there's an increase in the amount of lot coverage that can be used, and there's a slight reduction of setbacks as shown here. The RSD1I zone does require full urban services under our servicing bylaws, which includes connection to the district sewer. And there's also increase in standards from more of a rural designation to one that is more urban. So this includes not just sewer servicing, but also drainage and wiring and street lighting standards. There is a possibility through development of the eco-village site where sewer might be extended closer to the property, which is very roughly shown with the red dots connecting to the pink lines, which would be our existing sewer lines. And if this is the case, the subdivision and servicing bylaw further limits on-site sewage disposal to areas where there is sewer being proposed. So the proposal that is instigating this particular amendments are being requested by the applicant to facilitate a strata subdivision. So they have provided a concept plan, which is shown on the right here, and includes lots of approximately 360 square meters in size. As part of the rezoning process, an environmental impact assessment was completed by an RP Bio, and this assessment declared the proposal to have a minimum impact. And as shown here, the high value areas that were identified as part of that environmental assessment are avoided, and most of the proposal is in the lower or no value areas of VSA 3 or 4, which are shown either in green or not shaded on the map there. So in summary, the contents of the bylaw subject to today's public hearing are to extend the urban growth boundary, to change the OCP designation of the property, and to change the zoning of the property to allow for low density residential intensification to occur. And this would allow for a residential subdivision with smaller lot sizes. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Okay, so we've had the staff report and now it's open to the public to speak, beginning with the proponent. Would you care to make a presentation?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. Thanks, Joanne. I think that was a very thorough report. Some of this might be a little bit repetitive. Subject property again is located at 13316. Can I get that slide put up? (13316) Prairie Valley Road. It's adjacent to Summerland's urban growth boundary, and the property is not within the agricultural land reserve. Next slide, please. As was mentioned, the requested OCP and zoning changes. It's changed the OCP designation from agriculture to low-density residential intensification and extend the urban growth boundary to include the property. And as you can see, the subject lands are right adjacent to the urban growth boundary presently. The OCP has also requested change the zoning from A1 agriculture to single-family residential detached intensive zone, RSD1. Next slide, please. The proposed development is to create a fully serviced small lot residential subdivision to provide lots for the construction of smaller sized single-family residential homes. Next slide, please. There's a few elements that are important to most developments, not unlike this one. Protection of the environment. As was mentioned, we did have an environmental impact assessment prepared, and that indicates that the proposed development will avoid existing high and moderate habitat value areas on the property. That slide shows the high values in red, which are at the top of the bank, the moderate habitat values, which are yellow, and the green on the bottom is low, and I guess it would be the northwest corner of the property isn't shaded because it has no environmental values. And we've managed to prepare a plan that stays out of these areas. Another aspect that's quite important in development in the Okanagan is avoiding hillside slopes. The proposed development will occur on the lower portion of the property where slopes are acceptable for development. Next slide, please. Thanks. And that slide shows in red areas that are greater than 40%, areas yellow are 30 to 40, and areas in green are less than 30%. And again, we've managed to keep our development out of those high slope areas. Next slide, please. In terms of servicing, another important aspect, the proposed subdivision would connect to the existing municipal water system, and the subdivision would connect to the municipal sanitary sewer once the sewer system has been extended to allow the property to be serviced. Depending on the timing of the municipal sewer extension, an application for a temporary private sewer system may be submitted. That's going to depend on the market and also, Madam Mayor, on the timing of the district to move forward with its sewering program. Next slide, please. In terms of rationale, the subject property is not agriculturally viable and has been excluded from the ALR. The proposed land use makes good residential use of lands that are not suitable for agriculture. The portion of the property proposed for gentle intensive use will maintain the single-family detached dwelling character of the surrounding area. The proposed residential development will not have a negative impact on environmental values on the property. The proposed residential development will only occur on lands with appropriate slopes. Next slide, please. The proposed residential development will provide much needed housing and will support the current shift in market trends for smaller homes on smaller lots. The proposed residential lots will not have direct access to Prairie Valley Road. Access to the development will be provided in one location at the northwest corner of the property. The proposed development will not have a negative impact on the use and enjoyment of adjacent to surrounding properties and will not have a negative impact on the farm uses in the area. The property is adjacent to the urban growth boundary, allowing for a logical urban growth boundary expansion. And Madam Mayor, we do have 2 letters of support from adjacent property owners, and I'd like to submit these into the public record. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you, ma'am. Actually, I did have one other point I'd like to make. In terms of access, Prairie Valley Road is the only road that accesses into this area, and Prairie Valley Road will be the road that will be used to access the district's future development plans up in the Deer Ridge subdivision. So over time, that road will need to get some level of improvement. This project will have minimal impact on the road compared to what the future impacts are going to be as the district moves forward with planning for some of its future lands. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. So now I'm going to the speakers list, and the first person on the speakers list for this first public hearing is Ron Kubek.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Ron Kubek, 6611 Giants Head Road, Summerland, BC. I'm here in regards to the subdivision at 13316 Prairie Valley Road, if you can put slide 1 there. As most of you know, I represented my daughter and her husband at the potential subdivision of 12914 Prairie Valley Road, which is adjacent to the property. First off, I'm not opposed to development. We need more housing in Summerland. It's something that's not been dealt with properly over the last 3 years. I'm not opposed to the upzoning, but I am opposed to single property zoning and the lack of foresight by council and staff. On September 5th, 2017, we submitted a subdivision plan for the adjacent property to create 2 new lots. We were told that they had to be 1 hectare each and leave the existing vineyard alone. It was on land that had been excluded by the ALR, and we were just waiting to get the subdivision done when my daughter and son-in-law had bought the property. We initially planned on coming off the top of the property where there's still gazetted road, slide 2 please, until your solar eco village removes that access. We had submitted a plan to staff, but they said no access from that property. You'll see proposed lots 1 and 2 and where the gazetted road comes in. Over the next few months, we worked with a subdivision plan within the 1 hectare zoning, lots that are 27 times the size of what is being proposed. In early 2018, Ms. Corey Gain, who replaced our contact Alex Condor, suggested we need an engineering firm versus the late George Giannotti, and he recommended the firm that the applicant next door is using. The consultant who the applicant is using said he knew Mr. Dinsmore and said that we could work out an arrangement. On May 14th, 2019, slide 3, we agreed with Mr. Dinsmore to provide us access on the bottom of the property there in exchange for giving him a driveway. He also requested that we give him 1.16 acre as a bonus to help him get to 2 hectares so that he could get an additional lot because he was at 1.84 hectares. Over the next few things changed with the district staff situation. Ms. Gain had replaced Alex, who had left. Then we dealt with Mr. Haddad, who took over when Ms. Gain let go. And we had an agreement, we're moving forward. Then Mr. Haddad left and Mr. Dolovet came in and reissued a new PLA that was more extensive than what we had agreed on with Mr. Haddad. And due to this and his engineering department's increased demands, we paused the project. Slide 4. Then on May 25th, 2021, Mr. Dinsmore came in with a new request for a larger amount of land, exchanged for the access agreement, he said in an email, which was land swap with my daughter that would have given him access to the gazetted road at the top of the property. I wondered why, but then I heard about the eco village concept. I figured out that he had inside knowledge from someone, council or staff who wanted to use the gazetted road at the top of my daughter property to get access to his property. Someone must have given him a head up. I asked a few council members, and one of you said for us to do nothing further on our subdivision, and we would get access off the top of the property. We then found on a council agenda that Mr. Dinsmore was proposing this project. Interesting enough, with the same consultant who we had used, but had never told us what was happening, even though we felt he had a fiduciary duty to do so. Zero communication to us on a joint proposal. Then we saw the staff report had recommended against this. Still, because of their relationship with Mr. Dinsmore in the community and possibly assisting some of you with your election campaigns, the council gave his project initial approval, and we're here now. The questions I have is, why was the applicant not encouraged to tie into the daughter's property, which would benefit the community with more housing? Why did council ignore staff to give this significantly increased zoning, 27 times less requirement than what we were asked for right next door? Why were my daughter and son-in-law not given a chance for the same zoning as the ALC had analyzed their property and all of the lands not in vineyard production, and they suggested that they be removed from the ALR? Why will the district not allow my daughter or my son-in-law to access their property via the gazetted road at the top of the property so they may do a similar density development to the neighbor? We were told that Mr. Dolovet would work with the neighbors to get access. Slide 5. You'll see that there's blue arrows down at the very bottom of the property, and one points to Mr. Dinsmore's property and one points to my daughter and son-in-law's property. In a meeting that he had with the neighbors, he assured us all that he would. Slide 6. He points out all of the important areas that are important to the property. Interestingly enough, the nose of the property down there at the bottom of the property is my daughter's property, but he was quite free to talk about that. In the first plan of the project that you all released to the public, Mr. Olivet and his consultants had shown a large park area on my daughter and son-in-law's property, plus a potential 32-unit project. Next slide, please. Where it's E, and it's been moved in the on the website. But the E, which was a 32-unit, was infringing on the property. And the plans on the municipal, Mr. Dolovet also shows an arrow at the bottom down there, which is park access. Interestingly enough, he shows a park access on my daughter and son-in-law's property. We haven't got a zoning in there. We haven't done anything, but he's quite happy to show you that there's a park access there. So my question is why not give them gazetted access off the gazetted road at the top of the property and provide more housing to Summerland? Slide 8, please. You'll see where the different opportunities are there to tie into the top of the property. My question is are you prepared to deal with this matter here now or in court, where one friend of council gets 10 lots and the neighbor who is closer to residential areas gets 2 1-hectare lots maybe? I was told when we applied him back in 2017, it's tough to get things done in Summerland. You had to know somebody. Having served on other councils in other areas of the province for 3 terms, I said, no problem, I think we can get along. I still went ahead trying to get this done so that we can help make enhancements to Summerland's first vineyard planted in 1968. We were told, however, along the way when we tried to suggest more housing via duplex or other options, nope, no less than 1 hectare. But Mr. Dinsmore's is much less than that. We were told no access in the past, yet planning staff have told applicants on other subdivisions in other communities and here to dead end the new road to allow neighbors to connect up for future access. It's planning 101. We would just like access to the road planned by Mr. Dinsmore, and we would participate in the costs of that and give us access via the gazetted road, or give us access via the gazetted road that has been that way for decades, and then the same zoning considerations versus the 1 hectare that staff are still trying to hold us to. Why is it okay for one neighbor to get zoning that is similar to residential properties 1 kilometer to the east, but not allow the neighbor directly to the east the same consideration? Council's left themselves open for damages, insisting that we have 1 hectare zoning, but allowing this high density next door. Your options, I believe, are table 4th reading of the bylaw and require Mr. Dinsmore to allow access to the new road so that we can do the same type of project, same density, and share in the servicing costs, and then pass 4th reading. Or give us in writing that you will allow access to the top of the property on the already gazetted road where the eco-village is planned, and give us the same zoning as Mr. Dinsmore, subject to all the necessary rezonings, and table Mr. Dinsmore's application until that time. Or table or reject Mr. Dinsmore's project as staff recommended so that the district is not liable for damages in how they treat one owner of a property versus another. Please understand, I'm very much in favor of smart development. Put houses and townhouses on hills and leave farmland alone. I'm in favor of more units and what they have proposed. The APC gets it, but the AAC does not get it. Hills and rocks should be for increased development so that farms, vineyards, orchards are left alone to farm. We even worked with Mr. Haddad and Tammy Rothery when she was here, when they requested an environmental survey that we had paid for that would help your eco-village thing, and we submitted that to staff free of charge. I'm just not in favor of someone with political connections with someone on the council getting a sweetheart deal while the neighbors don't get treated fairly. I thank you for your time. If you do vote in favor of this tonight, I would just ask you then to please provide a list of any money that you may have received for any of your provincial or municipal campaigns, a copy of all correspondence between council members and Mr. Dinsmore and his consultant, and a copy of all correspondence between Mr. Dinsmore and his consultant. We feel that we just would like to be given equal consideration, and the public has a right to know this information.
Mr. Kubek, are you almost done? Because you're well over the 5 minutes.
I said I'm done right now. Thank you.
Yes, we're going to hear from everyone first. Next on the speakers list is Stuart Jones.
Thank you. My name is Stuart Jones, and my address is 14302 Denike Street. And I oppose this application for three main reasons. The first two being consistent with staff's initial recommendation to deny the application. So the first reason is that it requires an extension of the urban growth boundary, to which I object. The boundary, I think it's an important tool. It serves to encourage infill within existing serviced areas near the central amenity core. It limits construction of new streets and utilities, along with their associated long-term maintenance costs. It limits degradation of the natural environment, and it reduces auto dependence. So I strongly support us reining in the, or certainly not going beyond the urban growth boundary. And frankly, I think it should be reined in. I think it's far too liberal, and I think that for a town of this size, 10,000 people, we should be probably looking at a boundary whose diameter is something equivalent to a 10 or 15-minute walk into downtown, which is about 1 kilometer or so. So in that direction, it might be Cartwright Avenue is about 1 kilometer's walk to downtown, or to the, say Victoria and Main. Our urban growth boundary sprawls well past that, up over Cartwright Ridge, into Prairie Valley, and well up Cartwright Mountain. So I realize we're not here to debate that boundary, but there's my thoughts on the boundary. So reason one, I don't approve of the extension of the urban growth boundary. Number two is the RSD1 zone. It's really, it's not appropriate for this remote location. The zone is intended to facilitate small lots for infill locations within 5 minutes walk of amenities and services. This parcel is far from that. It's a very rural property. And thirdly, the slopes on the site, and I suppose I may disagree a little bit with the consultant who's a very reputable firm, but I will say that I think the slope gradients on the site are very steep. To my measure, they range anywhere from 30 to 50% where the development would occur. Most municipalities that I'm aware of regulate development on any slope over 20%, and most prohibit development on anything over 30%. I've taken the liberty of drawing a cross-section of what I think this will roughly equate to, and I apologize, it's quite small, but this is the natural gradient, roughly cut through the middle of the development. To my understanding, it's going to require very steep and high cuts, as well as houses whose foundations need to step way down the slope to achieve bearing soil. And that is the view from Prairie Valley that you'd be looking up essentially underneath decks and into very tall basements. And so I think that that's a lot of degradation. As I say, I think the consultant's a very reputable firm, and I'm certainly willing to be challenged, but these are the gradients that I measure. So, and I think that really in this location, from a character point of view, steep rock cuts and soil cuts and homes essentially hanging over the slope is going to sit severely on the landscape, and I think it's going to make a very jarring gateway to the otherwise pastoral views you get rounding the corner into the Prairie Valley. And those are my three reasons for objecting. I also just want to, it's more of a question perhaps, but I noticed that one of the slides here in the layout shows a new bicycle path on Prairie Valley. Now, I'm not sure if that's a requirement of this development, perhaps not. If it were, and if council is moving to approve this project, I would just ask that I would support the building of a bicycle path and pedestrian path. It's extremely dangerous going uphill on Prairie Valley on the north side of Prairie Valley. So this path is required for public safety in my view. And so if it is built as a part of this project, I do support that. I think if I read their drawing correctly, that they're not showing it the full length of their frontage, and I would just ask that it be done for the full length of the frontage. So those conclude my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Third on the speakers list is Dwayne Ross. He's attending by Zoom. I can't tell. Oh, are you Dwayne?
Hello. Yeah, you got me there?
Yes, thank you. Please go
Okay,
ahead.
good. Yes, my name is Dwayne Ross. I live at 12917 Prairie Valley Road, which is just on the lower side on, if you will call it, or refer to it as Cartwright Bluff. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of go on record as not really supporting the whole thing. I really have a big concern about Prairie Valley Road itself, actually. It's probably the worst condition road in Summerland and probably the most used road in Summerland by all of the commercial vehicles, the garbage trucks, the dump trucks that come by. The road's actually in really, really bad shape. And yeah, so I don't know if this is the appropriate place to put a development. We realize that it's going to be 10 or 12 or however many lots it's going to be. Just expanding on just that just a little bit. We've gone ahead with this whole solar project, and it's been kind of mitigated and by adding some proposed development to it, which is going to be approximately 150 lots. So we'll call it between the two of them 150 new residences. Probably going to add, we'll say conservatively 300 vehicles. Probably going to equate to 500 to 1,000 more trips on Prairie Valley Road, every day. And traffic's already tough. The road's in bad shape. And, we could kind of just, maybe we'll just kind of reflect back a little bit, not so much exactly to do with this subject we're dealing with tonight. But I know when we were dealing with 12914 Prairie Valley here a couple of years ago, and the property owner wanted to see if he could put a variance in to get an adjustment on some of the proposed, I believe there's a bylaw for when you're going to subdivide, you've got to make certain road improvements to the frontage and whatnot. And he asked that be clawed back somewhat. And it was. And it was clawed back a whole lot. And so, rightly so, there was only one lot going in there at the time, and hopefully that's not going to change in the future. And so with that, I kind of sort of vaguely remember the representative for the property owner coming on in front of council and saying, and they debated, there was a conversation between staff and the representative or the property owner about what they were going to do for making improvements along that frontage. And there was a debate about it actually. And I'd have to go back and check, but I kind of do remember the speaking and it being of the matter of the sort that they were going to be they would consider giving some money to the city for future changes to the road. And so there was some, I think it was, and I could be wrong, I thought it was in the neighborhood of $40,000 that they were going to contribute to the city's coffers. And it went from one meeting to the next. And at the end of the day, the staff member from the development I think his name was David. He was no longer employed at the city at the next meeting, and the next meeting came and went, and yeah, it just kind of got rubber stamped by, I think, the manager, and whatever the contribution for the road improvements was kind of dissolved, and we're not sure what improvements would happen to Prairie Valley Road with this development. I just kind of don't really, in my opinion, I don't really think it's the appropriate place for a 10 acre, or pardon me, a 10 lot subdivision, kind of out in a ways from town here. I don't think the road supports it. The sidewalk certainly doesn't. And I'd just be curious to see what improvements would be made and what the city would think about doing if they did go forward with a project like this. And in light of the fact also with the Eco Village, one thing that was never really discussed is what improvements need to be made to the road. That's an awful lot of new homes coming into the area with no improvements to the road. There's no sidewalk. Boy, I'm just curious about all of that. So I just kind of wanted to go on the record as saying I don't really support it for those reasons. Mostly the road network is not good. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ross. Appreciate your comments. Okay, that's all I have on the speakers list. Is there anybody in the gallery that would like to speak to this public hearing? Please come forward, state your name and civic address.
My name is Mike Wozbicki, and I live at Sunset Place. So to get there, I have to go through Prairie Valley Road. And my previous speakers rightfully pointed out that this development doesn't show any possibility even of improvement of the main road in this area. I would say even more, it's a main road to get to the city from this side, from west side, which holds on a shoestring at this moment. So any new development, I cannot even imagine the industrial traffic during building this thing, how it will impact this road. So this is one issue. It's a very steep slope, like someone said before. So there's a lot of earthwork required to get those lots prepared, not even putting foundations and everything connected. So it will be serious earthwork before even subdivision will be ready. Those buildings will be hanging right on the steep cliff. So another point is where there is sewer to support those lots. You need, someone said, future tied to future sewer. So everything is in the future, but nothing really was concretely said how those lots will be serviced. Because to build a sewer, it is, I don't know how long in the future plan, but those lots being so small and on a steep hill, do they have enough space for those sewer fields? Like you have a sewer tank and septic field you have to have, right? Before sewer is built. So each lot will have to have septic field where there's a room for that on the steep slope and a rocky foundation of it. So it has to be somehow incorporated in the whole project. So all those things together, road and sewer, which is main factors for development like that, will tell you, think twice before you allow to do it. And this is on tight curve of the Prairie Valley. What is the future development of Prairie Valley if we basically close this bottleneck of this road without any future plans for that? If, let's say, future development, proposed development, will enter into right-of-way of a future Prairie Valley, it will be extremely difficult to improve this road after this whole development is done, because you will have to deal with expropriating or maybe buying back property which you already approved for development. Think about it, that Prairie Valley has to be improved, and it is serious bottleneck to access the city from the west. If we choke this thing, we are done, and it will be very costly to repair this mistake. So concluding, I'm opposed to the project like that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please come ahead, Dawn. We also have your letter of opposition in our council package.
I'll make this very brief. My name is Dawn Richards. I live at 14119 Prairie Valley Road. And for me, it just seems like there's a lot of asks to get this property rezoned and a variance on top of that. For me, it's mainly about that a development of the scope it is not in keeping with Prairie Valley. And like I said in my letter, you know, it's mostly agricultural with country residential on the west end. So to have this high density development on the east end at a very busy part of the road, like a few people mentioned, I just think it's a bad idea. And that's all I have to say other than my letter. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right. Council, questions of Brad or anyone that spoke or the proponent? Councillor Barkwell and then Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. One of the speakers brought up a subject that had been on my mind as well. I remember when we gave approval for the subdivision immediately to the east, there was quite a discussion on the contribution towards the road frontage, and our regulations would have required hugely expensive improvements for a simple two-lot subdivision. So what are the requirements for improvement on the road frontage with this development?
Through your worship to Councillor Barkwell, I'm just actually pulled up our comments from our internal department, Public Works. But that the SDS bylaw, or subdivision development servicing bylaw, was requiring construction of Prairie Valley Road to be at a rural collector road cross section, no curb or sidewalk required, but a 1.8 meter paved cycling lane was proposed, I think, in the future for Prairie Valley Road. I think that's the cross section that was referenced by one of the members. However, I believe that the applicant's consultant submitted a development variance permit request to vary that, similar to the one to the east, to vary those requirements. However, those haven't been brought forward to council yet because of this rezoning being still the parent planning approval that's required before they move forward with any variance requests.
Okay, Councillor Van Elfen and then Councillor Holmes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a question through to our planner, just for clarification. One of the speakers talked about septic tanks and septic fields. This subdivision proposal is going to have its own treatment facility, its own on-site treatment. So each unit will not have its own septic. Am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct, through your worship. What is proposed originally by the applicant was a private installed community septic or sewer system that'll treat the sewer on site for all 10 units. However, with the district initiating the proposal of the eco-village site, it paused the consideration of that and exploration of that, consideration of a private system. So now I think the consultant is looking at various options for connection to sewer, whether it's the district system or a private system, and it'll be contingent on the timing of the eco-village, most likely.
Councillor Holmes?
So yeah, I had the same question, but if I could get further clarification. So the proposed zoning requires connection to community sewer. That's correct. And and that the intention is that we hold this at third reading, that we don't adopt the rezoning until such a time that that's possible. Is that the intention? Thanks.
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Holmes, that is correct. That is staff's recommendation to councils. We hold it at third reading, not adopt at this point in time. However, and until either connection to community sewer is determined to be feasible, or a variance is issued by council to the district's subdivision development servicing bylaw. So either one of those is what our recommendation is.
I have a question that kind of follows up the two sewer questions, and that is, isn't it a requirement of an extension of the urban growth area for you to have sewer in place? I mean, I'm just looking at this particular one, but also Hunter's Hill, there was lots of conversation about that particular one.
Yeah, there's different schools of thought with that, your worship. From my perspective as a planner, as the planning should come first. So you set your urban growth boundary, and then you design and build and plan for sewer extension to those areas that you've identified for growth. And so as an example, Deer Ridge is currently within our urban growth boundary, even though it's not sewered, because we do see that as an area of future growth for the district.
Right, but going by what you just said, is this property, I understood that this property was an expansion to the urban growth area, that it currently is not in the urban growth area.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, so the planning really hadn't been done for this particular property. Where Deer Ridge, yes, but not this particular property. And that because they potentially are able to tie into the sewer, potentially, that's why the urban growth expansion is part of this discussion.
It's required to allow for the OCP amendment to place the residential single family intensification zone. That's the reason why staff's requiring the urban growth boundary be expanded.
Okay, to me, the two things don't align, but that's fine. I have another question too. Where is my other question? Oh, I'm just trying to recall this. When Anthony Haddad was our CAO, but he was also the Director of Development Services, I believe, and maybe council can correct me, I believe that there was a change made to the slopes to up to 30%. Oh, good. I see people nodding their heads.
Yeah, that's correct. So that was one of the last changes Anthony Haddad made before he left, was to make an amendment to our official community plan to allow for areas that were previously or prohibited from development through this 30% slope requirement within our official community plan, to allow for potential development of those areas under the guidance of a geotechnical engineer and through a geotechnical assessment being prepared by an applicant. So there were a number of examples he brought forward at council time. This was in November of 2020, that of areas where we could consider more development within the district of Summerland for slopes that are greater than 30%.
Okay, and so that's how the slopes that are greater than 30%, that's how it fits with this particular proposal? Because we're hearing that 30 to 40%, and some people were saying it might be closer to 50%.
I don't know if this area was identified specifically by Anthony at the time. He was, I think, identifying other areas, but it would be something that would be under geotechnical review to allow for the development.
And that's over 30% or over 30%?
It's basically anything that is considered to be a risk of geotechnical slopes. And our building department as well can flag an area where there is geotechnical required. There is some discretion that we have at staff level, but yeah, it's generally, I can't comment on what the slope is of the site. I don't have that offhand, maybe Joanne does, but it would be something that would be required for this development.
Good, because that was my next question. Okay, thank you. Those are the questions I have at this time. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So council this morning had a really good conversation about the 20-year road master plan. And one of the things we talked about was the design for Prairie Valley Road in 2023 and hopefully the build in 2024. So my question with that is, by the time we get to design, will there be a determination of what that corner needs to look like for the future potential of Deer Ridge and Eco Village and all of the things that could potentially be developed beyond the toe of Cartwright?
I'll go to you, Brad, and I think that McElhaney, I'm sorry, I can't remember your name just now. Brad wants to speak on this as well. Is that? Yeah. Okay. I'll go to this Brad first, and then that Brad second.
Yeah, there's two Brads. Yeah, I'm not too sure of the plans from the Works Department, but I can tell you that if that is a plan for the 2023 design, we'll be ensuring that we do try to capture future growth as part of that design process. We already have a good idea now from the Eco Village concept plan how much, in terms of total number of units and density we can expect if that project moves forward. I think we have an idea of probably as well how much future development that we could consider in the Deer Ridge area, because there are some slope constraints as well on that property, and provide some at least conceptual information to an engineering firm on the total number of density units that would justify improvements to Prairie Valley Road. But it'll be part of that process, I'd imagine, in 2023.
Okay. Councillor Patton.
Oh, the other Brad.
Sorry, the other Brad. Brad Alenko.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. There was a slide that was put up. I'm not sure if we can put that presentation that I had. There was a slope analysis slide there. That might help clarify a little bit of information about the slopes. While that slide is coming up, I've also got a comment on the roads. That's great news that District Summerland is looking at road design and possible capital project. In the plans that we showed for this proposed subdivision, we contemplated road dedication. We know what staff is looking for in terms of right-of-way. We've taken that off of our plan, and our design excludes that. So if this goes ahead and a subdivision application is submitted, pardon me, the owner will be dedicating the required amount of road width to facilitate a proper road. If this project doesn't go ahead, you may not have the road width to do what you need, and then it's expropriation or something to try to get that land. So the owner is definitely prepared to provide the land for that right of way, and the timing seems to be marrying up nicely with what the district is planning on doing. Keep scrolling. One more. There we go. Oh, no, one more. That's environmental. There we go. So the red area is area that's 40% and greater. And there was a speaker that suggested 50. It could be near the top. There is some areas that are really steep, but that red area that shows that it's above our development is 40 plus. The area in yellow is 30 to 40. So there are some areas that are in that 30 to 40. And we acknowledge that a geotechnical engineer will be required to confirm slope stability. I can confirm that the geotechnical report that was previously submitted on an adjacent property did confirm that up to 35% was acceptable. It's just around the corner. We're not going to be using that report certainly to support or justify this. We'll be getting a geotech in on this one as well, but we're anticipating that our limit will be right around the 35% slope, and that will be the limits of construction. Thanks.
I'm going to go to Councillor Patton, then I'll come back to you, Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To our Director of Development Services. Has there been, Mr. Kubik had brought up some very valid points. Has there been any discussions with Mr. Kubik in regards to the Hammerhead extension onto his property, or has there been any discussions at all with Mr. Kubik in regards to that?
Your Worship, to Councillor Patton, I don't know if I'm the right individual to ask. I believe there has been a number of discussions with the the two landowners together with regards to access easements across both properties. I'm not too sure the status of that conversation. But from the staff's perspective, no.
Councillor Carlson.
Would it be appropriate to ask Mr. Kubik something similar? Yes? I just have a question.
Yes, you can ask people that spoke.
All right. Just so you used the past tense when discussing your participation in your daughter's property back in 2017. And so similar to what Councillor Patton just asked, I guess would future conversation initiated potentially by council or the city in regards to the future of that property, would those conversations be with her or with you?
She's asked me to be here tonight. She's in Vancouver at a mine presentation. So in the
Thank
future,
you.
I don't know where it is. Depends on what I'm up to.
Thank you very much.
Okay, other questions? Do you have something new to add, Brad?
Yep.
Please come ahead.
Thanks. I just wanted to comment on the access. Part of a subdivision requirement when you create lots is there's two fundamental aspects. You have to have legal access to the lot, which means you have to front a local or provincial road, and you have to have physical access. Sometimes the legal access isn't the same as physical access. The development we're proposing, we're not anticipating access to these lots directly from Prairie Valley Road. We were anticipating a lane across the back of some sort, quite possibly a strata. So that road behind these lots may not be, in fact, I suspect they would not be a public road because the road requirements, the road width requirements for a public road are significantly greater than what the road access would be required for a strata. So it's quite possible that this road on the back would not be a public road, it would be a strata road. That doesn't preclude a discussion with an adjacent neighbor about access, but it would not be a public road to give public access. So we would have to have conversations and work out all sorts of, it would be an easement agreement between that property and the strata to allow that adjacent property to have access over that strata road. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Brad. So what you're saying is there'd have to be a reciprocal access agreement between the two owners to access one property to the other property if this was to ever expand based on the Strata Road, because it's not built to a
Municipal standard.
A municipal standard for a connector road. So
Yeah.
this would be more of a reciprocal access agreement so that Lot A would have access to B and B would have access to A.
Well, it actually it wouldn't be a reciprocal because our client's property would have no reason to go onto Mr. Kubek's property. So the easement would really be one way. It'd be the Kubek property gaining access over the Strata Road. But yes, it would be a Strata scenario. The other possibility, which has been done, I'm not sure whether Summerland approving officer has gone down this road, but a lot of municipalities will actually, rather than actually having a Strata Road, there'll be easements across the back of each of the properties, reciprocal easements. So that lane is actually now private property to each of those owners. Doesn't really change the way of getting access to the Kubek property. It would still be some type of an easement over the property.
Thank you so much.
Councillor Barkwell?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Is there some sort of limit on the length of a one-lane back door access road like this can be? Fire access, things like that? Somewhere in the back of my mind makes me think there is a length, maximum length. And this one looks pretty long. Maybe I'm mixing it up with some other regulation.
Through your worship to Councillor Barkwell. I think there might be some more information required at the subdivision stage for this concept. There may be a larger turnaround required to accommodate a fire truck for fire access within the strata. That would be one area of concern from our fire department. Right now, the plan that's shown is conceptual only. It's conceptual for the purpose of rezoning. And there would be further details at the subdivision stage with our local departments, including our fire department and our public works department.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, I'm going to ask the gallery if there's anyone that would like to come up that hasn't spoken yet or would like to speak further. Please come forward.
Prairie Valley Road. And I just want to say I'm adamantly opposed to this. I'm directly across from it. It's going to be ugly, dust storm. And in the 15 years I've lived there, I've personally witnessed 4 vehicle accidents on that corner. And, there's garbage every day stringing from people's vehicles. It's busy, it's dangerous, and it's going to be a horrible, horrible look coming into Prairie Valley. So I just want to go on record as saying I oppose.
Thank you. Anyone else? Please, Mike.
Thank you. Just to add quickly to what I said before, I have a very similar situation when I live at the Sunset Place, where we have a sort of like strata septic field for 7 houses, 6 houses. This project doesn't even state any solution to the sewer. I'm back to the sewer system, and we have to have communal septic field, which is quite sizable because of those houses. So project like that, from my quick review, doesn't show anything like that at all. So before you make a decision, please look at this project from that perspective, that we are putting a little bit cart in front of a horse, because there is a subdivision being planned without any serious look at main utilities, roads and sewers. And again, back to several statements already, Prairie Valley, it's a major access to the city from the west. It's already very narrow and very dangerous. If you put several houses on very steep slope, right on a sharp curve, that is a recipe for disaster sooner or later. Thank you.
Okay, I'll ask for the third and final time. Is there anyone that would like to speak to public hearing 1?
Yes.
Oh, Mr. Ross, please go ahead.
Yes, I just would like to reiterate, actually, I'm looking at a report from the Agriculture Advisory Committee that they had in early 2021, where they reviewed this. And part of their comments were, although the farming potential of the property is limited, the surrounding area is predominantly agricultural, and the addition of residential uses may create conflict due to noise, odor, and spraying. And they go on with the recommendation that the application be denied on the basis of using the urban growth area as the primary planning tool when considering new residential development as a way to mitigate sprawl, promote compact community development patterns, preserve agricultural land, and protect areas with diverse ecological values, and the potential conflicts that could arise as a result of having residential development within close proximity to agricultural land. And of course, as we know, right across the street, that's where you have the agricultural land. And so I really think that, the city council needs to look at all of these inputs from their committees and take note of that. Because Prairie Valley is a very unique, you know what I refer to it as? You know what I refer to my property as? My Prairie Valley paradise. And that's really what it is. And we don't, we don't want to change that too much. So everybody give that some thought, because it is a paradise and we only have one chance. So let's not bug it up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, anyone else? All right, I will declare our first public hearing closed then. And we'll go on to the second one, 5.1 on our agenda, site-specific zoning amendment, 15835 Logie Road and 15836 Industrial Avenue.
Don't bug it up.
Good evening, Council. So, this is a site-specific rezoning application for 15835 Logie Road and 15836 Industrial Avenue. The proposed site-specific zoning designation seeks to amend the light industrial zone to include storage yard as a permitted principal use. This would allow the operation of a general storage facility offering outdoor storage, boats, RVs, and commercial storage options in the future. Following first and second reading that was provided on April 11, 2022, Council scheduled a public hearing for this evening, Monday, May 9th, 2022, for the public to provide comment on zoning bylaw amendment number 2022-013. So the property previously operated as a truck cap manufacturing, storage, and retail space. The existing buildings on site will be demolished and replaced with a fenced outdoor storage area. The subject site is designated as light industrial in the district's official community plan and is currently zoned M1 light industrial. The application seeks a site-specific text amendment to the light industrial zone to allow for the property to be used as a general storage facility. Commercial storage is a permitted principal use under the existing zoning of M1 light industrial, but it is specific to indoor commercial storage in enclosed buildings. The proposed business operation for the site includes outdoor storage of boats and RVs. This is a use that is currently only permitted under the storage yard classification. You can see in this table a list of uses that are permitted in both the light industrial and the heavy industrial zones, and the uses that are only allowed under heavy industrial. As you can see, there are many similarities between the zones, and you can also see the M2 zone allows more expansive and intensive uses such as sawmills and wrecking yards. The inclusion of the storage yard use to the M1 property to this property by itself is not seen as overly intensive by staff and could even be considered as a light industrial use. There are several neighboring jurisdictions, including the City of Penticton and the City of West Kelowna, that permit outdoor storage uses within their light industrial zoning designations. As shown in the site plan, the property would be fenced off with entrance and exit gates. The fencing would be solid wood at 2.4 meters high, satisfying the zoning requirement for screening. Parking stalls for storage line the north and southern property lines. Allowing storage as a site-specific use within the M1 zone is not anticipated to have a significant impact on the nature of the light industrial designation or diverge from adjacent light industrial uses. And with that, I conclude my presentation. Thanks.
Thank you, Alex. Does the proponent wish to speak? Yes, please come to the podium.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Council. Thank you for taking the time to consider our application. I'm just here to hear any questions, comments, or suggestions from you guys or the public. So I welcome your comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anybody else like to comment on this second public hearing? Okay, we'll go to questions from council and then I'll ask again afterwards. And then perhaps Mr. Taylor would like to address a few things too. Council, do you have any questions about this public hearing? Well, I don't see that anyone has any questions. Mr. Taylor, did you want to add anything? No, you're good. Okay, I'll ask for a second time if there's anyone else that would like to speak to public hearing 2. And a third and final time. Is there anyone that would like to address us? Okay, well, that was a lot quicker than the first one. I declare this public hearing closed. Thank you, everyone. And now I'll call to order our regular evening meeting of May the 9th. This meeting is being recorded live and is streaming. All representations to council, written or verbal, will form part of the public record and be available to the public for viewing electronically or as a written record. Members of the public may access the meeting or participate in the following ways. You can attend council chambers in person by registering in advance of the meeting. Just contact the corporate officer at Summerland CA to ensure there is enough space in council chambers. And speaking of that, it was nice to see a lot of people in council chambers tonight. Secondly, you can watch the meeting live or recorded on the District of Summerland YouTube channel, youtube.com, District of Summerland. You can register in advance to speak during the meeting. Members of the public who wish to provide comment during the public comment opportunities found under items 8 and 15 are asked to register in advance by contacting the corporate officer at corporateofficer@summerland.ca with your name, civic address, and how you will be participating, whether in person, by telephone, or by Zoom. Our corporate officer will provide you with further details when you register. Fourth, you can request to speak during the meeting. If you haven't registered in advance but wish to speak during the public comment opportunities, you will be given the opportunity, time permitting. After I've provided everyone who has pre-registered with the opportunity to comment, the floor will be open to those in council chambers and those on the conference line. Conference line can be accessed by dialing 778-907-2071 and entering meeting ID 506-489-9374 and passcode 485186. Are there any late items to introduce? No? Okay, so could we have adoption of the agenda?
Madam Mayor, sorry, I apologize. There is a late item, and it'll be added as item 9.5, and that is the housing on agricultural lands.
Oh, yes, thank you. Okay, so adoption of the agenda as amended. Councillor Van Alphen and Councillor Holmes, all in favor? Thank you. And adoption of the minutes from the April 25th regular evening council meeting. Councillor Van Alphen, Councillor Patton, all in favor? Great. Moving on to the bylaws that were the subject of the two public hearings tonight, beginning with the OCP amendment bylaw and zoning bylaw amendment bylaw for 13316 Prairie Valley Road. And we are considering third reading. So council, if you have any questions for clarity, please feel free to direct them to our Director of Development Services now. Okay, so, Councillor Barkwell.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor. I was just wondering the advantage of taking this to third reading and waiting for a sewer application or else a septic field application, not quite sure if I'm using the correct terms, and or just taking it to fourth reading or adoption and making the same weight. It would still require, if it's not connected to the new sanitary line, it would still be have to come to council for consideration, a yay or a nay on a sort of what do you call a private system. And so really, is there any advantage to just going to third and not going to full adoption?
Yeah, maybe I'll start this and you can maybe chime in, Joanne, if you have anything else to add on. And through your worship to Councillor Barkwell, I think from a planning perspective, we would have concerns in applying the zone to lands if it didn't have the ability to be serviced. So that's still a question mark from staff's perspective. You know, if there was a variance provided and there was a clear understanding of how sewage treatment would be handling on site through a private system, then I think we'd be fully comfortable at the staff level to provide adoption, but there's still uncertainty there. So I from a planning perspective, we don't like to zone areas for a development or a development type if there is no possibility for it to be developed in that fashion in the future. So that's that's the reason why we recommend holding it a third, so that we can confirm that the site can be serviced before placement of the zone on the property. Anything else, Joanne? No?
No. Just to follow up, is there any time limit on how long it can be held at third reading before a decision has to be made?
I don't, through your worship to Councilor Barkwell, I don't think so.
Okay.
It can be held at third.
Any other questions? Okay, could I ask someone to bring this to the floor so we can have further discussion, please? Thank you, Councillor Van Alphen.
I'll be happy to bring it to the floor, Madam Mayor, so we can have further discussion. That official community plan amendment 13316 Prairie Valley Road bylaw number 2021-015 be read a third time. And that zoning bylaw amendment 13316 Prairie Valley Road bylaw number 2021-016 be read a third time.
Thank you, and seconded by Councillor Barkwell. Okay, open for discussion. Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Some of the concerns raised over this development are actually the very reasons that I would like to see this development happen. As was discussed earlier, we not too long ago removed the prohibition on developing slopes over 30% because those are the lands that are available to us. Just think of the geography of our community. The orchard land is sacred, so that leaves the hillsides. The hillsides often have ESA 1 land, which our regulations prohibit development on, and I believe ESA 1 land surrounds the solar project and Mr. Kubik's land at the top, and that would prohibit development. This is an area that is not of any agricultural use. It is not environmentally in the prohibited environmentally sensitive area. And so we have to do what we have to do. Costs a bit more to cut into the banks, but I think it's an efficient use of the land to build back into a slope. And the other part of it is that this will, subject to whatever council of the day decides if they want to give a variance, but it will contribute a whole lot of money towards the improvement of Prairie Valley Road in that area and provide us the road right away that we're going to need for the improvements that we discussed this morning. So those two aspects of it, or concerns, actually are positives for me. And the other part of it is I just, for the life of me, cannot see this as anything other than infill. It is not sprawl. It is right beside urban growth area that extends for a mile to the west, or maybe half a kilometer. So to say that you're expanding the urban growth area outwards is just makes no sense at all, because there's a whole kilometer of urban growth area, a mile to the, or kilometer to the west that you would have to, that you would drive right by this to get to. So for those reasons, I like the project. And the question of a sewer hookup versus a private system, that's going to be a question I won't address now, but I know I have thoughts, but it's not on the table right now. So, but everybody knows that we're pushing hard for sewer extension up to Deer Ridge to deal with all the sewer that comes down. I wouldn't want to see that problem exacerbated by a local system, another local system. So I'll pass the mic. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I concur with Councillor Barkwell. We talked this morning about Prairie Valley Road and with the road dedications that we would see from this property, the road dedications that we know that we receive from the Kubik property. So that gives us the dedications right around that corner. I think that so the road issues, and as Councillor Carlson indicated, by 2024, we're looking at hopefully doing some work up in that area and getting that road in better shape. But I do think too that it complements Councillor Van Elpen's Eco Village. Not only that, but we will be then indicating or involved a sewer spec area where each one of these homes would be contributing to the sewer costs of that new line that we're looking at putting in into servicing the Deer Ridge area. So I do understand some of the concerns, but on the other hand, I think that this we're not leapfrogging. We're actually the urban growth area. I'm not sure why these areas were not included when the urban growth area was done, but I do agree that I think that this would complement the area. Thank you.
Councillor Holmes and then Councillor Van Alphen.
I guess first, I think we need to recognize what pressure we're all under to provide housing. That housing is a huge issue. There's a lot of pressure on our ag land. There's a lot of pressure on an environmentally sensitive area because of the need for housing. So we can always find reasons, I think, why a development isn't ideal. But I don't believe this one is overly intrusive. It's not intrusive on the environment or on ag land. So the only question is can the infrastructure support it? That's the big question. And as was said, we are going to need to improve that Prairie Valley Road regardless. And then it's just the question of sewer and as was said, as was mentioned, that's still a question, and that's why we're not adopting. I think our development services staff explained that quite well. I don't really believe it's council's job to mediate between disputes between neighbors. I think the urban growth boundary at that in there was kind of arbitrary straight line across the toe of Cartwright, and I see no reason why neither this property nor Mr. Kubik's daughter and son-in-law's property shouldn't be within that urban growth area. So I will be supporting the motion that's on the table as well. Thanks.
Councillor Van Alphen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm comfortable holding this at third reading at this point in time. I support it. For the fact of the matter is I look at this development as Councillor Holmes alluded to, that this is the kind of development we need, smaller developments, more hopefully affordable to the general public. I think it's close to town. I don't see it as a leapfrogging thing. I'm hoping that we see sewer sooner than later up through the Eco Village and beyond to Deer Ridge and possibly beyond that. And why I say that is, yeah, Prairie Valley Road definitely needs to be upgraded, but we just went to an alternative approval process on Giant's Head to borrow X amount of dollars. And by sending sewer out this way, I'm hoping that we can, we'll have a bigger tax base with the Eco Village, this development, possible development up in the Deer Ridge area, possible infill possibilities in Deer Ridge. Once sewer goes up, there are some large lots, there could be subdivisions, could be carriage homes. So, I mean, I just think it's a win-win, and this is the, smaller type homes that I think we desperately need. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay. Councillor Crossan.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I guess it doesn't really matter at this point what I say. I've accounted for, but one of the things that I find interesting about a proposal like this is that there's concern from the agricultural community, there's concern from the development community, there's concerns from people who see it as in opposition to what is around it, right? And so that's something that's always happened in Summerland, and it's something that I don't think is going to go away in Summerland. And so what we need to do is make sure that when we're planning, we do more of a wholesome plan. We talk about what it is that not only the piece we're talking about today, but the piece beside it, and encompassing the Eco Village and talking about it as a wholesome thing instead of just one piece and another. And so putting it into the urban growth area, it does make sense. Whether it ends up being 8 lots, I don't know. Maybe by the time the road gets built and the sewer goes in and the road needs to be wider and there's only room for 6 or 5 lots or something like this. And I guess I see some potential there. I understand why the neighbors are concerned. I kind of understand why the agricultural community isn't concerned, but at the same time, staff didn't recommend this, but staff has no problem recommending a later item on our agenda, which is potentially going to allow up to 450 new residences in our community on farmland, right? So there's a few of these things that I'm kind of grappling with that make it complicated. And sitting at third reading, I guess that makes sense to me. I hope that during that time, the people who own the property next door can consider what that might look like for them, whether they can work together with this landowner, whether they can work together with the district, because that's part of the eco-village conversation. That's what council asked the district to do, is talk to neighboring property owners, see if we can make this a more wholesome and inclusive project that isn't just about the District of Summerland. So with all of the potential in Prairie Valley, but also the potential of doing it right, I think that we can move forward to third reading. However, I certainly don't think we need to be adopting it and allowing this to go forward without a wholesome a sewer and a road plan. So that's where I will leave it. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have any comments?
Yeah, I'll just add a couple things. I've been back and forth on this one. This one's a tough one. I listened to all of my fellow councillors and everyone who spoke at the public hearing, and that was all really helpful. I guess at the end of the day, I'm going to support this, but I hear the neighbors when they talk about their concerns with the road there. And so and also, you know, how tight houses are going to be up against that steep cliff. So I have trouble envisioning how all that's going to look as our entryway into Prairie Valley. So I just think that we really need to be thoughtful about how that's done. And so like, we need to think about the sight lines and the tight curve on that bend and just how we kind of work all that. I also think that we need to have a bike lane in there, because if we're going to have growth out in Prairie Valley, we need to allow people to safely ride their bikes from that area into the downtown. So I think that that's really important as well. And I think that's pretty much all I wanted to add for now. So just really, you know, giving thought to how that corner is going to look. And then, my final thought was that at one point we had talked about doing a future plan for Prairie Valley and kind of our vision of how that area was going to look. And I don't know what happened to that. But I think at some point we should go back to that and do I guess you would call it a neighborhood plan for that valley, just how we see it looking in 5, 10, 20 years. Thanks.
Just want to remind everyone here that what we've been referring to as the eco-village is still a proposed development. We're talking like it's a done deal. Well, it isn't. It's a proposed development. I have a few concerns about this development, concerns that I expressed previously, even at the very first meeting when it first came forward. My biggest concern is the sewer situation. And that still hasn't been resolved. I understand third reading, and then we'll wait. But I don't think this is the right place for a number of smaller lots and smaller homes. I just don't think that it is. I totally agree with Councillor Holmes and others that Summerland is experiencing a housing crisis like every other municipality in Canada, probably. But that doesn't mean we have to maybe go ahead with the decision that we'll regret later. This morning we had, as we've heard already, we had quite a long discussion about the 20-year roads and water master plan that we will be getting the results of in October. And one of the things that rose to the top from all of council was that our roads need to be safe. And we heard from another number of people here tonight that this won't necessarily lend itself to an additional safety in the road. One of the people that spoke tonight said that he has seen 4 accidents on that corner. And whether those are, whatever the reason, whether it was wildlife on the road or taking the corner too fast or running into another vehicle, certainly not safe for pedestrians. You always have to go on the south side of that road when you're going up. So we talked a lot about roads generally, but also about the priority of safety. And I know that this, won't be very popular here, but when did that ever stop me, frankly? I am not going to be supporting this any further. I think that we've heard enough concerns, and not just from the people here tonight, but from people that wrote in and from our own development services department initially. And so I won't be supporting this. I know that it's a moot point at this time, but I needed to state my case. Thank you. Okay, Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just sort of wanted to talk on a bit about some of the qualitative issues that people have brought up. I live in Prairie Valley Paradise as well, and it never occurred to me to oppose this development because I didn't want to look at houses, that I wasn't willing to share Prairie Valley Paradise with additional people. If that was the case, Summerland would never grow. 35 years ago, maybe we should have shut the door. So, 30 years, so Councillor Van Alphen could have got here. So I just don't really accept that point of view. And nobody's spoken. I was at the Agricultural Advisory Committee meeting when this was discussed, and I'm not sure if that committee really appreciated the good boundary that the road and the slope provides between that proposal and the horse farm that's across the road, and the steep bank, and the distance between the elevation difference and the actual distance and provision of a road. Often this agricultural and urban interface problem doesn't have the benefit of a whole road between it. It's houses up against the orchards. So from that point of view, I think it's a good boundary. And but anyway, I'm just sort of adding more to what looks like a foregone conclusion here.
Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? And opposed? That is carried. So it sits at third reading for some time. Okay. On to, my mayor's report. Pardon me? Oh, seconds. Boy, this takes so long. Yes, I'm sorry. The second public matter that was before us is a public hearing, and that is the zoning bylaw amendment, bylaw number 2022-013 for 15835 Logie Road and 15836 Industrial Avenue. Any questions of council for clarification? Okay, nothing. Could I have someone? Thank you, Councillor Van Alphen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That zoning bylaw amendment 15835 Logie Road and 15836 Industrial Avenue, bylaw number 2022-013 be read a third time.
Okay. Seconder, Councillor Barkwell. Any further discussion? Councillor Van Alphen.
As I said earlier, Madam Mayor, when this was brought to us at the table, I think this is a great use for this property, and it's a much needed amenity for the district of Summerland RV boat storage. So I'm fully in support of this.
All right. Anyone else? I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? None opposed. That carries unanimously. Okay, now on to my mayor's report. First off, a happy belated Happy Mother's Day to all Summerland mothers and grandmothers and mothers-to-be. As my sister said to me yesterday, thank you for having babies. Babies mean children filling the seats in our schools, employees for local businesses, young voices adding to community decisions, diversity in our population, and valued contributors to our community. So thank you, mothers. According to the 2021 census, the data on age demographics in Summerland show 28.7% of the population is 0 to 34 years, and 39.4% is between 35 and 64 years of age. The remaining 31.9% are over the age of 64. The last week of April, Councillor Barkwell and CAO Stat and I attended the Southern Ontario Local Government Association conference in Salmon Arm. One of the presentations I attended, I'm not sure if either of you were there, was on missing middle housing, the housing that addresses intensification, complete communities, housing choices, housing affordability. Housing choices, both rental and market, may include duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, row houses, townhouses, and apartments and condos. At Council's meeting with School District 67 on May the 2nd, the matter of attainable housing was part of our discussion related to getting children into the schools. High quality education is available in Summerland schools, but if families cannot afford to live here, the entire community is missing out for the very reasons I spoke of in my opening. Later that day, CAO Stat and I attended a pre-conference event with the BC Manufactured Housing Association. I knew that homes built off-site in a controlled environment, such as Moduline in Penticton, are more affordable than stick-built construction, but I also learned that the manufactured homes have much lower greenhouse gas emissions, as much as 43%. So that's 43% less. That's significant. Homes manufactured off-site do not work in all scenarios, and certainly it has to be a decision made by a developer, but perhaps the affordability and sustainability aspects of this style of build is an option that bears consideration. On May the 3rd, I attended a presentation by Councillor Tim Lazard of the Penticton Indian Band at the BCMHA convention. Councillor Lazard spoke of the issues the band is having on housing their members. Their waiting list is at 200 right now. Both Councillor Lazard and the representatives from BCMHA spoke about how all communities can benefit from collaboration and forming partnerships, as we try to do a lot of here. Other items of special interest at the SILGA convention included the impacts of our changing climate, particularly the 2021 heat dome presented by Interior Health, which we spoke about this morning or this afternoon at our council meeting, a tour of the Salmon Arm Food Hub and Maker's Space, and a presentation from Minister of Municipal Affairs and Immigration, Nathan Cullen, and who spoke briefly and took questions from the floor. Some 30 resolutions were passed by the SILGA membership and will be sent on to UBCM for the September annual general meeting and convention this year in Whistler. The most impactful session for me was the keynote speaker, Jesse Wente. He told a very personal story about an ongoing medical situation he's facing, how he learned about it, how he dealt with it emotionally, his treatment, and the continuing impacts. Mr. Wente, who is a Ojibwe member of the Serpent River First Nations, then compared the medical diagnosis to the impacts felt by Indigenous people when European settlers arrived in the 16th century and early politicians created policies that continue to impact their lives some 500 years later. It was a very moving presentation. There is always much to learn at local government conferences, and this year was no exception. It was especially nice to be able to reconnect in person with colleagues and to share challenges and accomplishments. One other thing I want to add in here. I don't know if Councillor Barkwell, you were still there. I know that CAO Stat had to leave early for other business reasons, but I won the Grand Pot Prize. I don't know if you were there. No. So I won a wonderful grand prize from Salmon Arm, the sponsoring or the host city. And yes, I'll be spending a weekend in Salmon Arm using all of those goodies and gift certificates. Finally, the District of Summerland received a Community Excellence Award in the category of Social Responsibility for the George Riga Arts and Cultural Center. And CAO Stat will also speak further to this in his report. And that's it for tonight. And on to you, Graham.
Thank you, Your Worship. If I recall correctly, Councillor Barkwell also won a prize, door prize, some kind. I won nothing at all. Although it's always a prize spending time with the both of you, so I suppose I had that. Won the lottery on that. The flood restoration in the approved areas along Aeneas Creek continues. However, we are delayed by the discovery of nesting birds in the location of Centennial Trail near Peach Orchard Road. As soon as we receive clearance from our consulting biologist, we will resume activities on site. While we intend to be able to restore the safety of the trail through this work, the project is not a major trail rehabilitation and beautification project. The key focus of the approved work from the province is to ensure protection of the existing infrastructure, including the road, from the freshet. Work continues at the Eisentalk Reservoir to gather up and burn woody debris. Snowpack is below normal, so we are beginning to fill the reservoir to ensure that we reach our water storage goals this season. However, remaining work to resolve the woody debris issue will resume in the fall if needed. Despite the low snowpack values, currently we do not have any concern with our ability to fill up our key water storage infrastructure for use later in the season. The Fortis power outage to service their substation was carried out according to plan on April 29 and 30. I have received reports from both the fire department and the RCMP that, other than 2 false alarms, the power outage did not increase crime or fire events in the community. Thank you to all residents for their patience as Fortis makes these changes. A further power outage will be scheduled in the fall to finalize the work on the substation. Lastly, I wanted to also say how proud I am of the work of staff from many departments who supported the revitalization of the work at the George Riga Arts and Cultural Center that resulted in the district receiving the Community Excellence Award from SILGA at their annual convention. It was a huge project with all the challenges that a project of this size brings. Staff worked across departments and with many stakeholders and contractors to see the project come to fruition. And that has also now been recognized as excellence in the region as well. With that, I conclude. Thank you.
Councillor Holmes.
Yes, thank you. So just a question regarding the work on the Centennial Trail. You said it's not a trail restoration project. So does that mean the path will not be open to the public?
It's just for, through the mayor, thank you for the opportunity to clarify. We are doing trail work there. We do intend to open that trail to the public. But in some conversations with public and stakeholders, it appears there might be public perception that it's primarily about beautification of that trail. And in fact, that the work that's being conducted there is to do with protection of the infrastructure due to the freshet. What we have permission to do with our provincial approvals is to clear trees out of the way and to restore public access as part of our overarching work in that area. But we won't be doing a whole bunch of new trail work and widening and putting it up higher on the slope and guardrails and bridges and things like that. It's just incidental and peripheral to our other project to protect from freshet.
Right. first of two public comment opportunities. Do we have anyone in the gallery that would like to speak? Please come forward, Marianne. You know the drill.
Marianne McDonald, 6505 McDonald Place. So this is concerning item number 12, which is the being put forth by the mayor. So I have some concern with this particular proposal based on the anti-racial discrimination and anti-racial policy if you are using the guidelines set forth by the Lidstone and Company. From my perspective, the policy would need to be broader and not exclusive to people of color and Indigenous people, as their document continually references throughout. That in itself is discriminatory, and it seems to be targeting Caucasians specifically. And the third bullet on the first page is not inclusive if it is used as presented, and stating all peoples of all ethnicities, which would be more encompassing. This document also infers that Caucasians are the only people who are racist, and that is a misnomer. Racism is a two-way street. The second section, which talks about scope 2.1, if the policy is to apply to all those listed, staff, etc. I have a concern that you would be asking volunteers, especially to sign a document, and that might prove to be an issue for some people. 3.31 states employees, volunteers, and contractors must speak in an inclusive manner. That would need to be expanded on. Everyone has their own interpretation of what is inclusive based on their own experiences. And I have the question, whatever happened to people being polite? Period. And finally, under definitions, people of color is being used as an alternative term to visible minority. I might remind council that as of the 2021 census, Caucasians have now become a visible minority, and I would like to see how that is addressed as well. Thank you.
Is there anyone waiting on the line to speak? No, no one's registered. Okay, anybody else that's in the gallery? Okay. On to 9.1, development variance permit, 13615 Latimer Avenue, DVP 22-003, and Alex.
The District of Summerland has received an application for variance at 13615 Latimer Avenue. The proposal seeks to vary the minimum required front and interior side setback. The subject property is a small residential lot in Lower Town, Summerland. The applicant is proposing to construct an attached garage in the current parking pad area of the property. The proposed addition will require a variance to the prescribed front and interior side setbacks. In the OCP, the future land use designation of the subject property is low-density residential, and it is zoned RSD1, residential medium lot zone. These land uses are consistent with neighboring parcels. The applicant is requesting a variance to section 10.1.6AI of the zoning bylaw, or 1 of the zoning bylaw, to reduce the minimum required front setback for principal and accessory buildings from 6 meters to 5 meters, and to vary section 10.1.6A3 to reduce the minimum required interior side setback from 1.5 meters to 0.6 meters. These setback reductions would allow the property owners to construct a one-story attached garage. The proposed garage would improve the homeowner's ability to contain vehicles in a tidy manner on the subject property. The sloped nature of the lot, coupled with the siting of the existing home, creates complications with respect to maintaining minimum setback requirements. The property slopes heavily from west to east, containing a steep driveway off Vladimir Avenue, leading to a leveled parking pad in front of the existing home. This is the only flat area on the property and is currently used for parking. Siting a garage in this location would also help mask a tall retaining wall that is currently existing, supporting the parking pad. Constructing a garage in an alternative location on the property would require significant alteration to the land and the installation of further large retaining walls. Reducing setbacks on residential properties is seldom encouraged, as it can disrupt from the form and character of a neighborhood. However, the variance being proposed is not anticipated to negatively impact the streetscape or have impacts on adjacent neighboring lots due to the front slope of the land and the much higher grade off the roadway. Further, it will go towards improving the homeowner's ability to store vehicles in a tidy manner on their property. Based on the above considerations, staff recommend approval of the proposed variances. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Councillor, are there questions? All right. Anybody willing to bring? Thank you, Councillor Holmes.
The council authorized issuance of development variance permit 22-003 for property located at 13615 Latimer Avenue, legally described as Lot 5, District Lot 455, Osoyoos Division, Yale District Plan 15495, and that a variance to the following sections of zoning bylaw 2000-450 be granted. Front setback section 10.1.6AI. Is that an I? Yeah. To vary the front yard setback from 6 meters to the 5 meters proposed. Side interior setback 10.1.6A3 to vary the minimum side interior yard setback from 1.5 meters to 6.6 meters proposed.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Councillor Barkwell has seconded. Is there any discussion on this? I'll call the question. All in favor? And none opposed. Thank you, Alex. I think you're up for the next one too, aren't you? ALC referral. ALC referral application, non-adhering residential use, ALC 65264 at 11815 Conway Crescent.
Yeah, so the district has been forwarded a non-adhering residential use application to permit a proposed pool and shed for residential use at 11815 Conway Crescent. Section 34.3C1A of the Agricultural Land Reserve Use Regulation allows for one residence on a property with a total floor area which is 500 square meters or less. Residences that exceed this maximum size and that were constructed prior to the February 22nd, 2019 are permitted through grandfathering provisions. However, they do not allow for any future expansion. Any request for residential uses in excess of these residential regulations permitted by the ALC or its regulations require a non-adhering residential use application to the ALC. So the subject property we have here contains an existing 1,160.7 square meter residence that was built in 2011 and is grandfathered as a legally constructed residence. The application for a non-adhering residential use proposes the construction of a new 62.9 square meter residential pool and a 9.2 square meter residential shed. Throughout the official community plan, agriculture is recognized as a significant part of Summerland. This includes the physical significance of representing about 35% of its total land base, as well as its social, cultural, and economic contributions to the community. There are also policies speaking to residential uses in agricultural designations to confine residential development in the ALR to farm residences and to develop a farm residential home plate to minimize the impacts of residences on farm parcels. The agricultural small acreage zone allows for farm uses and permits residential uses within a specified farm home plate, where residents and other structures, for example, a pool, hot tub, any related residential structures, can be sited. The remainder of an agricultural lot outside of that farm home plate is meant to be used for agricultural purposes. The zoning bylaw, section 8.1.5C, limits the residential building lot coverage to 35% of this farm home plate, which equals to a total of about 316.75 square meters, or 3,409 square feet. Under a separate application, DVP 21-032, a variance has been requested to increase the farm home plate area from 905 square meters to 1,232.8 square meters, and to increase the allowable coverage within that farm home plate from 35% to 100%. This would provide the total residential building lot coverage of 1,232.8 square meters, which would include the new pool and shed building. This application was put on hold at the request of the applicant until this ALC application has been processed. Interesting. I'm missing a slide in here. I can go over the AAC comments. I don't know where that slide is. So the application was considered by the Agricultural Advisory Committee on April 21st, 2022. Discussion was had about the large size of the existing home, and it was actually specifically noted today to staff that it was requested that I go over again the size of the existing home and confirm that it is 1,160 square meters, or 12,400 square feet, which is actually even larger than it's stated on BC assessment at this current time. So I was just asked to further clarify that. Other notes at the AAC, some members noted that enough arable land had already been used for residential purposes, and that further residential expansion could elevate the residential use on the property. Ultimately, the AAC did not support the proposal for the pool and shed at 11815 Conway Crescent, as it is at an excessive footprint that does not comply with zoning regulations or the intent of the current A1 agricultural designation. Oh, well, okay. Well, there they are. I'll maybe give you guys just a moment to briefly read over if you like.
We also have it in our request for decision, so thank you for that, Alex.
Sounds good. Okay, so the proposed residential pool and shed generally align with the district's OCP policies to allow residential uses to be located within a farm home plate and to limit residential use of agricultural designated properties to support farm use. However, the proposal is not in conformance with the district's zoning bylaw for farm home plate provisions. If the ALC does approve this application, a development variance permit would be required to be issued to increase the farm home plate coverage. This application is required by the ALC as the pool is not seen to meet the criteria as necessary for residential use. However, a pool and a small shed are common ancillary and accessory uses to a residential use permitted in the district's zoning bylaw. Although a residential addition to the existing dwelling would not be supportable by staff, given the size of the existing home, it seems reasonable to allow for an ancillary structures given the current use of the property. In favor of the proposal, the dwelling footprint will not increase as a result of the proposed development, and the location of the proposed works is unlikely to have significant impact on the existing or future farming potential of this property. The area proposed for the pool is well outside of the existing operational vineyard, located in the backyard behind a residential building in a landscaped amenity area and will not require the removal of or disruption of any existing agricultural lands. For this reason, staff are supportive of this request and recommending the forwarding of this non-adhering residential use application to the ALC. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Questions? Councillor Holmes and Councillor Carlson.
Thanks. Could you just go back to the site aerial image?
This one or this one?
Yes, that one. So could you show me, so what is the home plate now and what it is they're asking for?
So currently, the property is not in conformance with our farm home plate regulations. So it was constructed prior to our farm home plate regs being introduced, just prior, actually, I think just a year before. And so currently it's non-compliant, which is why if this was approved, they would immediately be required to obtain a DVP on top of this approval in order for us to allow the construction of this pool and shed. I can go over the exact numbers again, but basically what the request would have to be, what the variance request would be to council, would be varying the farm home plate area, which is typically specified at 905 square meters. That would be going from 905 to 1,232.8. And the coverage, which is typically 35%, would be requested to go to 100% to cover the entire existing home and the new pool and little shed that's proposed.
Councillor Carlson.
That's an interesting set of numbers. I think there's a lot of properties in Summerland that have a farm home plate that has existed far before we have farm home plates. I don't think any of them have 100% coverage. And so I'm just wondering, have we seen that number before? I mean, that's a significant amount of development on what one would consider basically it would be a single lot, and now it'd be like you covering your entire lot and your neighbor covering your entire lot to have 100% lot coverage. Do we have that anywhere else, or is this the first one we've seen?
Yeah, if I can take that one, Alex, thanks. Through your worship to Councillor Carlson, I think this is a bit of a unique situation. I don't think we've historically issued 100% variances to the farm home plate before. Again, knowing that perhaps this house was constructed before the farm home plate restrictions were in place in our zoning bylaw, it's also not in conformance with the 500 meters squared requirement from the ALC, which also came in after the fact, after this house was constructed. And I think a lot of that change in policy was due to perhaps houses like this being built on agricultural properties. If that helps.
Just follow then. So given that it's a pool, which we've heard is considered a normal use for a residence, I heard you brought the number up once today, 425 or so properties in Summerland that have a residence on farmland, many of them conforming. So do we open ourselves up to a whole bunch of proposals for swimming pools on farmland that require variances to the farm home plate coverage?
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Carlson, I don't think so. I'm fully a big subscriber that every single development variance permit that comes before council needs to be weighed differently and looked at, knowing the context of the current situation and the background of the property, and also the proposal that's being proposed before council. So just because you approve one variance today doesn't mean you'll approve another variance in the future, because you have full discretion as to when another variance is going to be approved at your leisure. Again, from staff's perspective, this is an existing situation. It's not ideal, of course. This is not the type of development that we'd like to see on our agricultural properties, but it's there. And we can't avoid the fact the house is already there. So we see this as being like what as Alex has presented as a normal use of a residential property. Thank you.
Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting one, being that prior to 2019 that this was allowed, and then the ALC changed the rules, if I'm not mistaken. It is excessive, there's no doubt about it, but it was allowed at the time. Today it's not allowed, but it was allowed. So to add a pool and a shed, from what I'm seeing at these aerial photos, will not disrupt the mature vineyard that is there today. I'd really like to see this go forward to the ALC because I'd be really curious to see what their opinion is on this, to be honest with you, being that they allowed this back in the day. So I don't know. I'm kind of torn between, but I like the fact that it's on the, if I'm not mistaken, the east side of this property and not in the vineyard area.
Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So if I got this correctly, the house is 1,161 square meters, and that's the house only. So if we add the pool, we add the area of the pool, and that would take it, and the shed, that would take it up to 1,232.8 square meters, and they're calling that I want to make that the farm home plate. But in no sense of the word, is that the home plate? If that's one word, or the words home plate. The area of the parking lot, the landscaped area on the way in, the area to the right, the lawn area, and the parking lot to the north, that's the home plate. The home plate is what, at 2 acres? That's the reality of the situation here. So in some respects, I kind of see why not. It's not going to change the farming area, but on the other hand, it's just so far out there. It's really kind of offensive. And then calling it an increase to the home plate for just the house area, that just makes no sense. What you'd have to do is give it a 2 acre home plate, or maybe. So I don't know. I wait to hear from more of my councillors on this.
Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. By the survey certificate, the foundation was surveyed back in January 2011. So I don't think we can consider it a home plate. I think at the time it was just a build. And when you take a look at we're still looking at 25 meters setback to the edge of the pool from one property line. We're almost 50 meters from another property line, or actually almost 50 meters, over 50 meters from the front property line. This is hidden in the backyard where I don't think that it is going to do any harm. Granted, the house is big, but I think anyone sitting around this table would love to have a 12,000 square foot house. So I see no issues with this. Thank you.
I have a question. Councillor Patton, did you just say that the survey documents showed 2011?
Yes, the foundation was surveyed January 2011.
Isn't that after our ag plan, 2008 ag plan that brought in the farm home plate?
Yeah, I don't know the timing offhand. Maybe Alex remembers, but I think that we adopted the agricultural plan, but there was a number of implementation projects coming out of the agricultural plan, being the creation of the farm home plate and creating regulations associated with it. I think it was presented that it happened a year later when it came into force. Okay, Alex got it. Thanks.
Yeah, so I looked into this when I was processing the application, and so yeah, it was actually adopted in just in the so the 2008 was the ag plan, but the actual farm home plate being implemented into the zoning bylaw wasn't introduced until 2010, until 2010, where and we issued the building permit for this structure prior to the issuance of the zoning update. So yeah. That's kind of the history. It was right around the same time, though. You are correct.
I would not want to live in a 12,000 square foot home. I'll just tell you that. Who wants to clean something that big? Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, I definitely agree. It's something that's over the top of something that's already over the top. But I hear what Councillor Van Elfen's saying. It'd be very interesting to hear what the ALC has to say about it. And so my question is, if we agreed to forward this to the ALC, does that then imply that we approve of it in the ALC's mind, or is it that we're just forwarding them for them to make the decision? Thanks.
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Holmes, thank you for that question. I think that's often something council's confused about this process, is that by us forwarding them an application doesn't really mean that we're just forwarding them out the application. They consider it as a local government approval. And that's the reason why under the Act, there is a discretionary approval of council before it goes to the ALC for their approval as a higher level planning authority. So my recommendation to council is if you're willing to consider a variance for this, because it'll come back before you as in the form of a DVP, then I would recommend that we would forward this forward. But if you're not prepared to do that, then don't waste the time of the ALC or the applicant's time in going through that process if you don't have ultimately support of this proposal.
So what you're saying is sending it on to the ALC just to see what their thought is probably not a great idea. It's not really fair. Okay. Okay, any more, Councillor Barkle?
So 2 weeks ago, we had an application, I think it was 2 weeks ago, on Jones Flat Road. And the application was to increase the farm home plate coverage from 35% to 45%. And Councillor Van Alphen and I supported that, saying it's not going to affect the agricultural use of that property at all. The farm home plate is out of production, so it may as well cover it more. So I think, to be consistent with that reasoning, Councillor Van Alphen and I should support this, and the rest of council not support it. And
as we heard our Director of Development Services, we have to look at these case-by-case basis. Just saying. Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a question through to our planner. When say it is approved this evening, let's say, and it goes to the ALC, and the ALC comes back and approves this, then it comes back to us for a variance. At that time, can we say, or could I say, yeah, I like the pool idea, but I don't like the house, the shed? Am I allowed at that time say, yeah, I think the pool's a great idea, but the shed, a little much?
Well, I don't know. To answer your question there, through your worship to Councillor Van Elfen, the only thing that would be the subject of council approval would be the variances that are being requested. So you couldn't say, well, I only like part of the variance. You would be saying that, no, you either allow the full amount or you don't.
Thank you for the explanation. Yeah. It was a stupid question. I now realize that. Thank you.
No worries.
Councillor Holmes.
So is there no way to put some more of that land into agricultural production? I mean, that little green belt at the bottom, for example. No, I was going to show you on the map, but or on the, like this part down here, even there, like, it seems to me, okay, well, nothing's going to affect the existing vineyard, but what about the opportunities to create some more agricultural land out of this? And is that negotiable?
Through your worship to Councillor Holmes, I think that's a great suggestion. Hopefully the applicant is listening to this discussion and is heeding your advice, because again, the variance will come back before council, and that'll be a fully discretionary decision of council at that point in time. So there may be opportunities for them to enhance their proposal in council's view, but also in the view of the ALC.
Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. To our director, 9.2 square meters doesn't require a building permit. So my question is, if it's under 10 square meters, it doesn't even count in lot coverage, does it? It does?
Yeah, it still counts towards your lot coverage calculation, unfortunately, yeah.
Okay, but no building permit. Thank you.
Okay, if there aren't any more questions, could I have someone bring forward a recommendation or a resolution? Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, that the non-adhering residential use application ALC 65264 for the proposed pool and shed at 11815 Conway Crescent be forwarded to the Agricultural Land Commission.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Traynor. Further discussion. Councillor Van Elfen.
I just want to really like what Councillor Holmes just said. You know, I think there might be potential here for some other areas, to be brought into production, maybe. But I hope the applicant is listening, and I think it's possibly a good solution.
Anyone else? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? That carries. Councillor Carlson and myself are opposed, Kendra. Thank you, Alex. Next up is 9.3, zoning bylaw amendment to bylaw number 2022-004, 10314 Blair Street, Z21-016. Joanne.
Thank you. So I'll be presenting this rezoning application for 10314 Blair Street. So the applicant is proposing to change the zoning designation of the property from institutional to agricultural small acreage A1 zone. So this property is designated in the OCP as agricultural, and the current zoning is institutional, which reflects the use of the neighboring church property and the historic use of the property in conjunction with that church. The property is within and surrounded by ALR lands, and there's a mix of land uses within the area, including several active farms as well as residential developments within and outside of the ALR boundary. So this proposal, the applicant wishes to demolish the existing home that is on the property to build a new single detached home with a secondary suite. And they provided a concept plan showing the location of the house and the garage and a concept sketch of what they would like to build. So the proposed A1 zone would allow for a house with a suite. And because the existing institutional zone only allows for dormitory or employee housing associated with an institutional use, rezoning is needed to facilitate this. There are other additional uses that would be permitted in the A1 zone, mainly agricultural uses that are already allowed within the ALR, and other accessory uses that are allowed in conjunction with some residential uses in residential zones. There are other uses within the A1 zone that are allowed, but they were kept off this list because this particular property would not meet the minimum lot size requirements for those particular uses. So for simplicity, I didn't list them. In terms of the zoning comparison of what is current and what is proposed, the A1 zone has lesser lot coverage and building height maximums, and a slightly different exterior side setbacks. Because the lot is only 0.1 hectares in size, it would be a non-conforming lot within the A1 zone, which has a minimum parcel size of 2 hectares normally. So in the official community plan, the proposed zone is consistent with the OCP designation, which is agricultural, which is a mirror of the ALR boundary and consistent with that designation. So under this, the OCP is seeking to try to maintain the integrity of the ALR and trying to uphold the expectation of the primacy of agriculture in these areas and reflecting those ALR boundaries. So we did receive various external agency comments on this. Just of note, the Ministry of Archaeology requested that the applicant do an info request, and this has been completed, and the ministry advised that no further permits were required at this time. And Interior Health also commented, identifying concerns about the capacity of such a small parcel being able to accommodate a house with a suite. So they recommended a registered on-site wastewater practitioner determine the amount of daily sewage the property can handle and identify a suitable backup area for when that septic system inevitably fails. And the applicant hired a rope, and this was completed. The report is attached to the council report today, but essentially demonstrates that there's sufficient design to accommodate the proposed use, along with a suitable backup area for the septic. So this application was reviewed by the Agricultural Advisory Committee. So there were several questions about the application, including the rationale as to why the A1 zone was chosen when it's not an agricultural use of the property. Members wanted just to have noted that the residential use of this property is kind of a historic encroachment on agricultural lands, and wanted to acknowledge that the proposed and the historic use represents a loss of potential farmland. There was also a question about how this undersized parcel that is not on community sewer fits in with the 1 hectare policy that the district bases OBWB funding on. So just to clarify that the 1 hectare rule applies to subdivisions and carriage houses. This is an existing lot, so there's no subdivision proposed, and there's no carriage house proposed on the lot. So there's no impact to upholding that 1 hectare policy in this case because it's an existing scenario. So after discussion, the AAC recommended that the rezoning application be supported by council. This was also reviewed by the Advisory Planning Commission, and they also questioned the rationale for the A1 zone. They had a discussion about the historic use of the property and the zoning of the property, and whether there was potential to go back to farm land at some point in time. And there was also a bit of debate on what category should fit, and kind of acknowledged that it was a unique situation where the current zoning doesn't fit, and they're trying to find something that does fit what the owner wants to do with it, while still recognizing that it's in an agricultural area. So after their discussion, the APC recommended that the application be supported. So the current institutional use is of the zoning is not reflective of how the property is being used, and it's not reflective of the OCP designation or reflective of being located within the agricultural land reserve. So this rezoning would remove some potentially intensive institutional uses that might not be appropriate for that property by changing the designation, and would allow for what's considered to be a reasonable use of the property to continue as a residential site. So the existing house and the historic zoning is a reflection of encroachment onto farmland. By assigning it an A1 zone, it allows for the property to construct the house, and it also recognizes the farm potential of that property in a long-term view. If there were changes with the neighboring church, for example, and consolidation with other parcels, it's potentially could be returned to that use or be used as a supporting use for further agricultural uses. And importantly, it doesn't signal that we're seeking additional residential uses in this area. So we're allowing for something on an existing lot to occur, but not signaling in our OCP that this is an area where we want further residential development. So we are looking at the existing property with an existing house and the A1 zone accommodating this and the applicant's intended plans for developing a new house with a suite. So with that, it is staff's recommendation that council support rezoning application that will align the zoning with the current agricultural OCP designation, and that the bylaws be read for a first time, and that a public hearing be scheduled. Thank you.
Thank you, Joanne. Council, do you have questions of Joanne? I have one question, and I've read and read and read the report. I know that there are surrounding properties that are within the ALR. This little particular piece is not in the ALR, or it is in the ALR?
It is in the ALR.
It is in the ALR. Yeah, so changing it from institutional to ag certainly makes sense. Thank you. Any other questions? Could I have someone bring forward the resolution, please? Pardon me, Councillor Barkwell.
So just trying to figure out, and I couldn't do it in time, are there going to be any setback issues with the higher setback requirements for A1 land on a versus a residential? Because essentially it's a quarter-acre lot with a house on it. It's a residential unit, always will, has been, always will be. There's a schematic there, and I was trying to figure out the numbers. 20, looks like 20, well, that's 20 feet. So from the edge of the lot to the garage.
Yeah, I can take that one, Joanne. So yeah, I'm looking at that site plan as well, the draft site plan. It looks like that it does meet our zoning bylaw requirements. 4 meters we require for side yards.
Right.
So that 20 feet would be sufficient.
Yeah, 4 meters. Trying to do that conversion. I'm too old to think in metrics, so yeah.
It's about 14 meters or 14 feet. Sorry. Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, Councillor Van Elfen, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The zoning bylaw amendment 10314 Blair Street bylaw number 2022-004 be read a first and second time, and that the public hearing be held on June 13th, 2022 to receive public feedback on zoning bylaw amendment 10314 Blair Street bylaw number 2022-004.
Thank you. Councillor Traynor seconding. Councillor Van Elfen.
Just a comment, Madam Mayor, I attended the Agriculture Advisory Committee meeting as a liaison for council, and if I'm not mistaken, maybe Joanne can correct me, I think the applicant was there on Zoom, and I believe part of this development is to house the aging father that now lives at that home. So it's kind of like, I think, younger family moving in and dad staying on the property also. So I thought it was a really good use. Thank you.
And thus the secondary suite, I guess. Great. Okay, further discussion? All in favor? And none opposed. Thank you. Hello, Alex. 9.4 zoning bylaw amendment, bylaw number 2022-017 for 9606 and 9806 Victoria Road South, Z22-004.
Thank you. Yeah, so an application has been received for a site-specific text amendment at 9606 and 9806 Victoria Road South. The site-specific zoning designation seeks to amend the heavy industrial M2 zone to include concrete and asphalt plant as a permitted principal use. The amendment would allow the applicants to bring an existing concrete plant at 9606 Victoria Road South into compliance with the District of Summerland zoning bylaw and further expand that concrete plant operation with the addition of an adjacent property at 9806 Victoria Road South. So the subject property, as mentioned, is currently designated as heavy industrial in the district's official community plan and zoned as M2 heavy industrial in the zoning bylaw. The application seeks a site-specific text amendment to the heavy industrial zone to include concrete and asphalt plant as a permitted use in order to allow for the expansion of an existing concrete plant operation. The proposed expansion includes a new stationary concrete plant that would be located at 9806 Victoria Road South and the decommissioning of the old concrete plant located at 9606 Victoria Road South. The offices and shops that are currently on site would remain at 9606 Victoria Road South. It should also be noted at this time, the proposed height of the new concrete silos is taller than the permitted height allowable within the M2 zone. The applicant has communicated and at this time has submitted for a development variance permit in conjunction with this application that would permit 2 new silos reaching a height of 21.23 and 19.69 meters respectively. So the approval of that variance would be required before any construction on site can happen or the installation of any new equipment. So this application was considered by the Advisory Planning Commission on April 22nd, 2022. There was general support for the continued use and expansion of the concrete plant use at the subject properties. Some members brought up parking and screening as things for the applicant to consider. Ultimately, the APC recommended that the zoning bylaw this rezoning application should be supported. At the discussion of the Director of Development Services, in accordance with the Development Application Procedures Bylaw, a developer-directed public information meeting was not required for this proposed zoning amendment. Under the District of Summerland zoning bylaw, concrete and asphalt plant is only a permitted use within the M4 resource industrial zone. This zoning designation was created primarily to accommodate large-scale resource-based industrial operations, such as natural resource extraction sites, solid waste and composting facilities, or aggregate material storage yards. There currently exists only one area in the district with this designation of M4 Resource Industrial. North Prairie Valley has a number of gravel extraction operations and is the site of the municipal solid waste and compost facilities. The concrete and asphalt plant use doesn't align perfectly with neighboring heavy industrial zone properties. Most adjacent uses are of general industrial nature permitted within the M2 zone, including an equipment rental business, a bottle depot, and a commercial storage facility. Another existing non-conforming concrete facility exists across from the subject property as well. The concrete and asphalt plant use typically produces more nuisances on adjacent properties such as dust and noise. As a result, these uses have more significant buffering and setback requirements compared to what is existing on the subject property. Given the decades of previous operation of this use at the site without any reported issues, it can be assumed that the use is compatible with the surrounding area. A modern concrete plant would be more effective in reducing noise and dust pollution due to the improved dust collection systems and quieter plant equipment. An up-to-date concrete plant can produce concrete significantly faster, reducing the amount of idle time for trucks loading, therefore reducing vehicle emission pollutions created by each load of concrete produced. As the expansion being proposed is modest and will have a positive impact on the current nuisances, staff feel that the site-specific use is a reasonable solution to the scenario. Policy 7.6.4.5 in the official community plan supports this approach through encouraging infilling and efficient use of existing industrial lands prior to entertaining new requests for industrial zone properties. The proposed expansion of this operation also aligns with the OCP objective to develop a strong and diversified sustainable economy that will provide expanded opportunities for employment and community growth. The applicant is proposing to bring an existing local industrial operation on industrial zoned land into conformance with the district's zoning bylaw, and also proposes to expand their industrial operation to allow for a larger operation that will bring additional employment opportunities to the district. Based on these considerations, staff are recommending that the request for the site-specific M2 zone that includes concrete and asphalt plant as a permitted use for the subject properties be supported. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. Questions for Alex, Council? All right, would someone like to bring forward? Thank you, Councillor. I'm going to go to Councillor Holmes this time, and then you can second Councillor Van Elfen.
Ben, you can look at that side of the room first. That zoning bylaw amendment 9606 and 9806 Victoria Road South bylaw number 2022-017 be read a first and second time, and that a public hearing be held on June 13th, 2022 to receive public feedback on zoning bylaw amendment 9606 and 9806 Victoria Road South bylaw number 2022-017.
Thanks, Councillor Holmes, and Councillor Van Elfen has seconded. Further discussion on this? Councillor Van Elfen.
Just a comment, Madam Mayor, that zoning has been there forever, the heavy zoning. I just want to commend the owners. It's nice to see a business expanding in Summerland, especially a business of this magnitude. There's competition across the street, and there's a lot of competition in Penticton that services this area also, but it is exciting to see a local company grow, and I'm really happy for them, and I'm glad it's going forward. Thank you.
Great. That may be a little premature because we haven't voted on it yet, but
I'll take that part back.
Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Great, that's unanimous. Thank you. No worries. Okay, now we are on to 9.5, which was deferred from this afternoon's meeting, housing on agricultural land. Actually, Joanne, before you get started, can you give me a minute to bring up the previous meeting document? Thanks.
Madam Mayor, while you do that, maybe I can share a few remarks of my own to introduce.
Yes, please. Please go ahead. Thank you.
In the 1970s, the province established the Agricultural Land Reserve. The Agricultural Land Commission is assigned responsibility for the overarching regulatory governance of the ALR by the province of BC. The district also ensures stewardship through complementary statements in the official community plan and district bylaws governing use in the area. On December 31st, 2021, the province amended the ALR regulation to allow for an additional residence up to 90 meters squared on parcels less than 40 hectares without ALC approval. Since the announcement of the proposed regulatory amendment, which was in July 2021, the district's offices have been getting regular inquiries about the potential to add a secondary residence on agricultural properties from local farmers and landowners interested in providing more housing options on their properties and supplementing farm income with rental revenue. It is the recommendation of staff that a key goal of our approach should be to align as much as possible with the flexibility provided by the ALC to provide options to Summerland agricultural landowners to diversify their operations while at the same time tailoring our alignment to the unique needs and context in our district. I think staff has achieved a good balance here in the proposed framework and have done a good job to consider and coordinate the various perspectives on this issue to achieve that balance. With that, I'll turn it over to Joanne to walk through the presentation.
Great, thank you, Mayor, Council, and CAO. So I will be presenting on our proposed approach for housing on agricultural lands with an aim to get direction from Council today to update our agricultural zoning. So in terms of regulatory context, just putting this up here just to understand what Graham is alluding to in terms of us working in a multi-tiered regulatory framework. So I'm not going to go into the details, but essentially our zoning bylaw and OCP have other overarching regional and provincial regulations and planning documents that guide us through this process. So one of them, of course, being the ALC and the Agricultural Land Reserve for those properties, but also our participation in the regional growth strategy and directing residential growth to growth areas and promoting sustainable growth throughout the South Okanagan. In terms of regulations under the Agricultural Land Reserve, there was a big shift at the end of last year in terms of residential permissions for lands in the ALR. So the ALC no longer requires their approval for an additional residence that's 90 square meters or less on properties that are less than 40 hectares, and keeping the discussion to that because I believe there's 4 parcels over 40 hectares under our agricultural designation in Summerland, so not applicable to very many instances. So we're just focusing on parcels less than the 40 hectares. So in this case, on ALR land right now, if you have a parcel less than 40 hectares, you are allowed your one residence up to that 500 square meter floor area, and additional residence up to the 90 square meters. And then within that main residence, you are allowed to have a secondary suite. So for Summerland, most of our ALR lands are designated as agricultural in the OCP. And of course, we have policies that are directing residential development within those, which currently confines residential development in the ALR to farm residences. We're also seeking to minimize impacts of those residential uses with the use of a farm home plate and providing adequate buffers in terms of new urban development and those interface areas. We also have an agricultural plan, which is a secondary plan to the OCP. And this document speaks in furthermore detail about farm home plates, among other things, encouraging residential development immediately next to the road or on pieces of the property that are not conducive to agriculture. And this, of course, is with an eye of protecting farmland from residential and urban growth. So our current zoning bylaw in terms of what it looks like, first off, we allow for principal residence and a secondary suite, and this is available to any property owner. And then the second part of that is that we allow for some secondary accommodation for farm workers. So this can be temporary farm worker housing or an additional dwelling for full-time farm help. In terms of the farm home plate that we have, we're working on a two-tiered system. So the one on the left is demonstration of the farm home plate for one dwelling. So essentially your main house is located within the farm home plate, and then you have a 35% coverage of a 905 square meter area. So that equates to a footprint of your buildings and structures of about 317 square meters, or about 3,400 square feet. And then we also have on the right, you'll see the farm home plate gets larger when you have additional dwellings. So your main house, and then if you have an additional dwelling for farm help or temporary farm work or accommodation, your farm home plate gets larger. And with that, the amount of coverage also gets larger because it's 35% of that larger area. So your footprint can be 5,650 square feet approximately. So we did a workshop, as council is aware, and some people from council participated in this with a stakeholder group, mostly members of our Agricultural Advisory Committee and our Development Processes Improvement Advisory Committee together. So in this workshop, we did have some presentations on housing, agriculture, and sustainability, followed by kind of a bigger idea discussion. And this workshop was kind of meant to be a starting off point around identifying some of the general issues around this topic. So the group did conduct a SWOT analysis, so identifying strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. There was also a roundtable in terms of how to balance those housing, agricultural, and sustainability interests, and some group discussion about farm home plate and the use of residences on agricultural processes. So in terms of the group, there wasn't a clear consensus, but there were kind of some themes stemming from the SWOT analysis that was conducted together. So just kind of hammering some of those points. We have a strong agricultural community and a sense of community identity that stems from agriculture. We also have pressure from outside forces and a desire to protect arable lands and a lack of information on current conditions. There was a focus in the workshop on sustainability, specifically to support food security and identifying urban areas for densification and housing for bona fide farmers and farm operations. So when the group did a roundtable about balancing those, there was a split on what ranked highest depending on the person, but it did show some underlining concerns, specifically with food security, which overlapped with that focus of agricultural lands for food production. There was a focus on ensuring sustainable development, which also kind of overlapped with potential opportunities that were identified to guide development to non-arable lands, and also focusing housing elsewhere, like in the downtown. And concerns about our housing needs, specifically needs of for farmers and their farming operations, and also for the community in general. So when we got into more details about the farm home plate and kind of asking the question as to whether that was still achieving our goals, for the most part, that feedback was positive and seemed to confirm the relevancy and the effectiveness of the farm home plate. There were some suggestions at that point to encourage people to build up and not out within these areas, and increasing coverage, but reducing the overall size of the farm home plate footprint, and also the potential for siting on non-arable lands or lands that might be less disruptive to farm operations. So what we found was that those workshop themes that we pulled out aligned pretty well with the agricultural plan that we have, as well as our current OCP. So it reiterated the importance of protecting agricultural lands for farm uses, supporting the agricultural community, and reducing farmland degradation, whether that's through the use of farm home plates, using non-arable areas, or directing growth to urban areas like our downtown. So in trying to translate these themes into an overall approach to present with council, the overall idea of what's being presented today is trying to do more with less. So based on the discussion, we wanted to avoid unintended consequences by introducing new uses. So we're suggesting that we do this by strengthening the farm home plate to limit encroachment on arable lands, while also aligning with the ALC to allow for additional flexibility for the farming community in terms of accommodations. And also a side benefit would be reducing incentives for people to be providing accommodations without receiving approvals, and using accessory buildings without them being permitted for residential uses. So with this, I am recognizing that with any additional uses comes additional pressure in terms of development and how we make our trade-offs. So we're focusing the carriage houses into an area where residential uses would already occur within that farm home plate. So we're asking for council's direction today on the proposed approach that would allow for carriage houses, but within a newly defined home plate. So this would change our A1 and A2 zones to allow for more to occur within the farm home plate without increasing its overall size. And then we'd also seek to better define how to site a farm home plate and what those requirements are. So on the left, we have a current farm home plate for one dwelling, which allows for an overall footprint of 317 square meters. So that's the 35% coverage. And then on the right, we have a proposed farm home plate within the same area. So this is unlike the current bylaw, where the farm home plate is not increasing with the additional use, but we're suggesting that we make an allowance to accommodate a carriage house within that existing farm home plate area, but also bumping up that that coverage area within the farm home plate to 45% to accommodate an additional 90 square meters. So this is trying to do more with less, so squishing more within within the same area and providing some more options for housing while using less farmland to do it. And something that we're also proposing is taking the temporary farm worker accommodation out of the mix when talking about the coverage requirements for farm home plate, by not including them in how we're calculating them. So they would be dealt with separately within the bylaw. Just to give another example of how this might work. So with the new farm home plate, say there's 2.4 hectares of land with apple orchard. There's an existing house of 177 square meters with an existing garage and maybe a shop for them to use. So under this scenario, we'd be adding that carriage house within that area that's already defined and allow for larger coverage, but would be less than the proposed maximum.
Could you take a question?
Sure.
At this point, Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Joanne. I'm a proponent and I like the farm home plate. I just have a question about it. So if we look at what currently is out there, I'm just wondering if staff have done some measurements. Have we determined, we just saw an example of where there's no really a farm home plate and there's huge coverage of things. And so I'm just wondering if we've looked at that and determined if every single person is going to come forward with a variance because their farm home plate is too large or doesn't quite conform to what it is that we're putting forward.
Yes, thanks for that. So I do think that the way that the current farm home plate is defined is kind of undefined. So there are a lot of variations as to how things are cited. So I do think that we could possibly look at ways to avoid scenarios for existing farm home plates, because one of the things that we wouldn't want to do is try to essentially relocate something that's already existing, but looking at new development in terms of where we want it placed, which would be either closer to the road or in an area that isn't practical or worse off for farming purposes. So those would have to be sorted out in the details, but we wouldn't want to require people to transplant their existing established farm home plate. So we'd have to write something into the bylaw for that effect.
Just to follow that, I just more mean, what if there is an existing farm home plate and it's well defined, but it's larger than what our bylaw specifies is permitted? Then you would have to be applying for a variance similar to what we've just seen. I just wonder if we know. I think it's probably 50%. Like there's a lot that I think would be a larger farm home plate than we're permitting. I just wonder if the effort is worth finding out or not.
Through your worship to Councilor Carlson, if I could take that one, Joanne. Yeah, I think that's a potential concern. I do want to point out, though, that this is not changing what's currently in our bylaw for the farm home plate size of 905 meters squared. So already we're in that situation of bringing things forward for variances if they don't conform to that farm home plate size requirements, which, like the scenario tonight that the council weighed into, we're going to still run into those issues moving forward. I think some flexibility that Joanna is proposing for non-conforming situations is probably smart, so that we avoid bringing forward a bunch of variances to council. So that's part of the direction that we're recommending, as well as providing even additional flexibilities to maybe citing that farm home plate in areas that are not suitable for arable and agricultural production. Again, adding a little more flexibility to the bylaw instead of triggering the need for variance to council. So it's all in that theme, I guess.
Okay, I have a question too, but we first need to extend the meeting by resolution. So is someone willing to do that? Councillor Van Elfen, and a time?
9:30, Madam Mayor.
Okay, 9:30. Seconder, Councillor Holmes. All in favor? Okay. Thank you. I can hold my question off, but it kind of has to do with what Councillor Carlson was asking, so maybe I'll ask it now. And that is, we've been talking about the farm home plate. I'm wondering if within the farm home plate, if there already is a residence and there is farm worker housing in an area that I guess it's, let's say that it's in the farm home plate. And then we had talked a little bit, we heard again tonight, that talking about spots that are not necessarily arable. So if you already have a residence and a farm worker housing, then can you have another one in an area that is non-arable, that is not within the farm home plate? Or is this limiting it to just one extra residence, whether it's for farm workers or not?
Yeah, I think that's a great question there, Your Worship. I think what we're suggesting is the carriage house to be located within that existing farm home plate. Okay, so the carriage house is one thing additional that we're proposing to add to that farm home plate calculation. But the one, again, additional flexibility item that we want to consider is allowing the temporary farm worker accommodation, potentially a different type of use and building altogether, to be more flexibly located outside the farm home plate and in those areas that are not suitable for agricultural production. And that also provides more flexibility to the farming and the farmer of that property to locate that temporary farm worker accommodation in an area that's suitable for their farm operation, not restricted to the rules in our zoning bylaw.
Thank you. If I'll ask afterwards, okay, please go ahead, Joanne.
Great. I will try to be speedy so we can get to questions. So just in terms of what we see as the benefits for this approach, obviously this would be aligning with the ALC regulation. It's also seen as potentially limiting encroachment of residential uses on farmland by tightening up those farm plate regulations a bit more, and also reducing the farm home plate for the additional dwellings that we currently allow for, to again tighten up that area that we would see. There's also some flexibility in terms of providing more flexibility for temporary farm worker accommodation by not limiting it with the coverage requirements for the farm home plate, and also allowing farmers to use a carriage house as they see fit, whether that's for additional family or farm workers or for rental income supplements, and allowing the farm home plate to be moved into a less productive area, or being closer to the road and trying to get the best defined siding as possible. So based on what we're just describing are essentially asking for direction to bring forward some bylaw amendments to allow for some flexibility of residential uses. So allowing those carriage houses up to 90 square meters, as opposed to limiting them right now for an additional dwelling for full-time farm help. Limiting residential encroachment by citing those carriage houses within the farm home plate, and discouraging the use of arable lands for residential purposes further by specifying siting conditions for the farm home plate to be located either near roads or on non-arable lands, so land that's not suitable for agricultural purposes. And in terms of next steps, if this was to go forward, we would draft those bylaw amendments and try to get them out to committee fairly soon for comments, and then present back to council, hopefully in June or early July of this year for their consideration. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, Councillor Holmes.
Okay, thank you. So in the current bylaw, you're allowed a principal dwelling and 2 additional dwellings for farm worker help?
You're allowed 1 additional dwelling for farm help, up to 110 square meters. That's limited to 1 story. And then you're also allowed temporary farm worker accommodation as part of the bylaw. And the additional dwelling for farm help is located within the farm home plate. A temporary farm worker accommodation can be either within the farm home plate or an area identified through an agrologist report to be not suitable for farming.
Okay, follow up if I may. So on your slide there about the zoning currents, you have 2 additional dwellings. I guess one would be temporary. One would be a temporary foreign worker dwelling, and one would be a farm work help dwelling. Was that the idea between those? Okay, so if what would happen to that property today? Then it would become non-conforming, and if they have two additional dwellings on the farm plate, and what could they do with those 2 additional dwellings? They could then just rent them out to anybody, or how would that work?
Yeah, if I can take that one, through your worship to Councillor Holmes. Yeah, the proposed changes wouldn't change the total amount of dwellings that are allowed on the property. So you're allowed 1 additional dwelling for farm help currently within our bylaw. We'd allow 1 carriage house in replacement of that additional dwelling for farm help, and then a temporary farm worker accommodation unit on top of that as well, which would still be allowed under our proposed changes. So the temporary farm worker accommodation is a specified use. It has to get approved by the ALC as well. It's restricted to farm worker housing. So we consider that a different type of use than the actual secondary dwelling question. Which then when we look at carriage house versus our current bylaw with the additional dwelling for farm help, those are fairly similar in terms of the sizing. We're at 110 meters now. ALC requires 90 meters squared, as well as our current bylaw requires 90 meters for carriage houses. So nothing would change in terms of the total number of dwellings.
So, but like, I don't know if you could get that slide back up, the zoning bylaw current slide. I just want to know what would happen to that property. Yeah, this one. So the property on the right. So one of those dwellings would then become a carriage house that they could rent to anybody they want, or short-term rental or anything like that. And then the second one would what?
Still has to be used for temporary farm worker accommodation.
Okay.
That's the only reason that second one is there.
Right. So then they couldn't have an additional one on top of that somewhere off the home plate?
No.
Okay, thank you.
Got your hand up, I see, Councillor Van Elfen.
I do, Madam Mayor. And the temporary farm workers accommodation is a temporary building. It's not a fixed building. It has to be like a mobile home. So if temporary farm workers are no longer required, that building can be removed. Am I correct? As per the federal government or whoever?
Yeah, that's generally a condition that the ALC places on their approvals, where it's a temporary foundation, and it is something that would be removed if it was no longer used for temporary farm help.
Thank you.
Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just for clarification, so on your current bylaw, you can do right now we have a 90 meter squared. You've got an 85 meter squared farm worker housing. You got a couple sheds at 50 meters each with a 250 square meter house, right? Now, but in the bylaw, the proposed, you've taken what if you wanted to have the temporary farm worker housing within that home plate? Then it wouldn't fit on this home plate because you've dropped it down to 407 square meters. So we've kind of taken that temporary farm worker housing, if you wanted to have it in that general area, and we're saying, well, no, you got to now put it outside that plate. And am I not seeing that correctly? Thanks.
Yeah, through your worship, Councillor Patton, I can clarify that. I think Joanne could have answered this one too, but yeah, the temporary farm worker accommodation, what's being proposed is that it wouldn't count towards the coverage calculation. So you could cite it still within the farm home plate, but it just wouldn't count to that calculation of coverage. That makes sense. So it could go over and above that 45%.
So, okay, so we'd be at the 407 square meters maximum, but you could still put that 85 square meter temporary farm worker housing within that, which would increase you to well over 500 again, right? Because you're adding that 85 in there, but we're not calculating that 85 into the number. Okay,
yeah.
So it's included, but it's not.
Kind of. That's
all
correct.
right. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
If I could just clarify that, essentially the idea of why we're presenting that is where you're shrinking the area to try to get those buildings into a more confined area, but allowing as much flexibility for a temporary farm worker accommodation as possible, and getting out of the way of that kind of separate process and just talking about the permanent residential structures on their own, but still allowing for it to be sited within and confined within that space, but taking it out of the mix in terms of limiting the area that can be used for them, because they have fairly specific needs that can also be considered through an ALC application, and they are kind of done on a case-by-case basis.
Brad, you had something more to add?
Yeah, I just want to maybe add on. Sorry, we have three answers to this question, but I think the main point I want to hammer home is that for temporary farm worker accommodation, it's something unique and different in that it's for the farm operation. It's different than the residential use question because you're looking at ancillary uses that are for residents. But in that situation, we don't want to be seen as hurting a farmer who wants to try to place workers on their property for their farm operation. So we're trying to provide as much flexibility to the bylaw to allow that use to occur. And recognizing the ALC already requires a review and approval process, we don't want to necessarily get involved. That's our perspective.
Councillor Carlson, then Van Elfen, then Barkwell.
Thank you. Just wondering if through this process, we're going to be identifying, those 85 square meter farm worker housing that exist and ensuring that another one isn't built to make an additional dwelling. Will it help us sort of capture what's out there right now?
Sorry, I'm taking all Joanne's thunder. I think she did talk about, it's kind of added on there as a side benefit of the what we see from the zoning regulation is encouraging people to come forward with non-compliance issues. We recognize a lot of farm buildings, accessory buildings have been converted to carriage houses throughout the district right currently that are out there. We want to allow them to come forward as part of these new regulations to bring forward and actually get a building permit for those structures. And then in terms of us catching these in the future, every single building permit structure that comes forward will be reviewed in conformance with our zoning bylaw at the time. So we'll ensure that that these things are caught with the new zoning bylaw regs. But again, we want to encourage people to come forward with those carriage houses.
Okay, now we go to Councillor Carlson. No, Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just for clarification, because I think there's, I've heard confusion in the community. So today I could have a secondary dwelling for farm help. I could have a secondary dwelling for an immediate family member. And as the ALC's rules of December 31st, 2021, I'm allowed a 90 square meter for anyone I can rent out. I can't have all three, correct?
Yeah, just to clarify that point, thank you for the opportunity to clarify that for the public. Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Van Elfen. Yeah, basically the flexibility proposed on December 31st, 2021 replaced the previous residence for a family member that was allowed in the ALC. So it's now just one additional dwelling. They also doesn't care if it's for family purposes. They don't care if it's for farm help purposes. They're saying you're allowed only one up to 90 meters squared. You use it the way you want to use it. So it was a replacement of that regulation.
And I'm also allowed to have a secondary suite in my home.
Yes, that's what the ALC's requirement is. However, our zoning bylaw does not allow that. We say either one. You can have either a carriage house or a secondary suite. Currently with our carriage house regulation. So that is still something we want to flesh out, I think, with our zoning bylaw amendments.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Can I just add on to that? Sorry, just because this is an inquiry that comes to us a lot. So in terms of explaining what the ALC allows, you also have to align with our current zoning. So even though the ALC is currently allowing any use for that 90 square meter additional dwelling, our agricultural zones are limiting that use to an additional dwelling for farm help, which is just for full-time farm help to be within that building. So somebody can't apply for a carriage house right now and use it any way they want. It would have to qualify as an additional dwelling for farm help where it's housing full-time farm workers.
Councillor Barkwell and then Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What's your definition? How do you of a carriage house?
Yeah, I think that we don't have a lot of prescription in there of the carriage house. I believe we just call it a dwelling that can be, I'm going to have to put up the zoning bylaw here. Do you know offhand?
I don't know it exactly, but it's essentially an accessory building that's used for residential purposes. So essentially it's something that has a kitchen, a washroom and sleeping facilities within a building that is not attached to the main house, which is how it is differentiated from a secondary suite, which is located within or attached to the residence.
Yeah. So, sorry, just Joanne's correct. I just pulled it up. It just basically has to be within an accessory building separate from the detached garage or detached house. Sorry.
Okay, thanks. Because I always thought of a carriage house as some residence above a garage. And so I'm thinking, well, why does it have to be a garage here if you wanted to add another residence to your farm home plate. And so it doesn't have to have both the garage component. It could be a modular home that's put in there, mobile home. So the ALC's regulations are pretty simple. You can add another residence. Okay, and so why aren't we, maybe I missed something, why aren't we considering being in complete sort of congruence with the ALC regulations and allow a secondary suite in a house as well as this additional residence, whether you want to call it just an additional residence or a carriage house? Why aren't we considering that?
Yeah, through your worship to Councillor Barkle, I think that's a good question. I think the main reason being originally why carriage houses were restricted with the regulation that it was one or the other. You can't have both a suite and a carriage house, is because of there was concerns of parking, of having 3 potential dwelling units on maybe an urban residential lot. Keep in mind the carriage house definition and the regulations are already in our zoning bylaw. It's applied to all of our urban residential as well as country residential zone, which where for areas that are connected to sewer. So there were concerns probably from parking and density from having 3 dwelling units on a single family zone lot. Might be a bit smaller, but on agricultural properties, maybe there is more flexibility to allow all 3. I don't know. That's something we can consider. Any feedback from council?
Nobody else raised their hand. I'd say on the sort of properties that we're dealing with, 5 acres and up largely, not a problem. I'm not sure, I don't think we're going to get flooded with applications or anything, but just to keep, in conformity or an agreement with the LC regulations, that's how I'd like to see it. And I find the term carriage house confusing. I was confused until I realized I didn't have to have the garage. But anyhow, I don't know how the rest of council feels.
But that would only be for agricultural land? Like, can you distinguish between that and, say, a residential lot that already has a carriage house? I mean, still could not have, it still needed to have just one or the other. Like, can you do that just by the zoning?
We can clarify it in many different ways.
Okay.
Right, but potentially, yeah.
Okay, Councillor Patton and then Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Hey, as a point, City of Penticton does have a project that Grayback Construction was doing that does have carriage house and a secondary suite. So it has the main dwelling, a secondary suite, and a carriage house. So Penticton's already broke that mold for us. So yeah, anyway, food for thought. But anyways, back to clarification. So in this move that we're going to, the 90 square meter will be able on agricultural property to rent to anybody. Okay, perfect. And I agree with Councillor Barkwell in regards to the secondary suite. Thank you.
Councillor Van Elfen.
I agree with Councillor Barkwell also. I think we should stay with, within what the ALC has prescribed. I understand our Director of Planning's rationale in urban areas. Parking is the big one, but out on ALR land, I don't see parking as being an issue. So I would support Councillor Barkwell's thoughts.
Councillor Holmes.
I don't know if I support Councillor Barkwell's thoughts or not. I guess one question is the more housing and buildings you put on agricultural land, that increases the price of that property, and so does I just put that out there. Are we making it unaffordable? Agricultural land then unaffordable? Secondly, I don't know. I don't quite follow why we would do that in agricultural land, but we wouldn't allow it in residential properties. Why can't I do it at my house? For example, and to that end, I don't know if we should necessarily be looking at agricultural land to solve our housing problems. We should be looking at residential zoned lands to solve our housing problems. It's like, why don't we look at our industrial lands to increase some housing density in there? You know, so that's not necessarily saying I'm for or against the idea of having both secondary seats and shepherd and carriage houses, but I have questions. Thanks.
Okay, we're a minute and 30 seconds away from the extension of the meeting. So either we need to defer this, because this isn't the last thing on the agenda, defer the rest of the meeting until some other time, unless there's anyone that wants to bring forward a resolution to extend it beyond 9:30. Go ahead.
There's a lot of next steps for this conversation and this project, and I think we should allow staff to proceed to some of these next steps, because this isn't the last time council will be speaking about it.
So do we want to, are you suggesting that we just stop the discussion now then? And wait until other things come back to us? Or what are you suggesting?
I am, and I think there will be some good feedback, and I think that we can also do some more thinking, council themselves. I mean, it's been a really long day, and I've got lots more thoughts. I'm just not sure I'm going to be as coherent now as I should, but I do think that there's other people in our community who have more input on this than what has already been out there, and I think staff is ready to put this together and get the next round of feedback.
Brad.
Yeah, I think if I can comment on that approach, and the reason why this is brought before council is we want to reaffirm our approach. Like, we want to make sure that whatever we're going through with bylaw preparation and amendments, which is kind of our next step that was in that list of next steps to present to committees as well as present for public consultation, is what council wants to see. And that's the intent of this direction. So it would be great to have some sort of direction from council as to the kind of go forward plan, because that will allow us to proceed with those next steps that are within our presentation. But that's why our staff recommendation is constructed the way it is. It still allows room for flexibility for us at the staff level to develop regulations and also for those regulations to change as it goes through consultation process.
Is there someone that would like to bring forward that recommendation then? Councillor Carlson?
I'll do it.
Do we need to extend the meeting?
I'll make a motion to extend the meeting by, what, 10 minutes?
Yep.
Okay, 10 minutes, second. All in favor?
I'll move that staff be directed to draft OCP and zoning bylaw amendments for housing on agricultural lands to allow flexibility of residential uses by allowing carriage houses of up to 90 meters on agricultural lands, that limit residential encroachment by siting carriage houses within the existing farm home plate, and discourage the use of arable lands for residential purposes further by specifying site conditions for the farm home plate to be located near roads or on non-arable land, which is land not suited for agricultural production.
Thank you. Councillor Van Elfen, you're seconding. Great. Discussion?
Thank you. I think we need some more discussion on this secondary suite issue. Councillor Holmes raises some issues and questions that require some discussion. Had a couple of points on that. I agree with him. This isn't going to solve our problems. It's just one tiny little additional step where it won't impact on the agricultural, the agricultural land reserve. And parking is one issue, why we wouldn't do it everywhere, but it's not going to be an issue in a rural area where you could, park on the road like you do in residential areas if necessary. And and Councillor Patton just brought up the example where they're doing it in Penticton and probably specifying the parking and everything. So that's a legitimate point. And the answer is, yeah, do it in the residential areas too. So I'd like to give that more consideration.
Councillor Van Alphen.
Thank you. Just to comment on Councillor Holmes' comments on the, are we going to possibly make agricultural land unaffordable by adding these other dwellings? I look at it a bit differently. It's going to keep me on the farm. It's going to give me the opportunity to bring in a bit of a secondary income, possibly a work share type situation. Maybe they get a reduced rent if they're helping me on the farm. There's all sorts of different avenues I can look at with this scenario. And then comments about industrial parks. Yeah, I lived in one for 16 years. It was 2,100 square feet in James Lake, and it was lovely. I didn't mind it one bit. So there's all sorts of opportunities, but I don't disagree with Councillor Holmes or Councillor Barkwell. Maybe we do need to look at our residential areas and our carriage homes and secondary suites. I don't think this is, for me, it's got nothing to do with solving a housing crisis. It just possibly adds some more inventory. If someone comes and lives in my carriage house on my farm, it frees up some other accommodation somewhere else, possibly. So, I mean, I think it's just a win-win, but it's a win for me. If it keeps me on the farm longer, I'm all for it. I had no intentions of selling it. And if I do sell it, as I think we can see throughout our community, a lot of these small acreages, 10 acres and under, are so costly today that they usually become lifestyles of the rich and famous. People aren't actively farming them. They build a big home on them and they have a lot of room. So anyways, my comments. Thank you.
Okay, further discussion on the resolution that's on the floor. Okay, I will call the question. All in favor? Okay, none opposed. That carries. Thank you. 9:35. Okay, well, 12.1 is the notice of motion that I wanted to bring forward. 8.1. I don't have any bylaws for adoption. Oh, sorry. There's no notices of motion in the afternoon one. So we are on 12.1 because we don't have anything for 10 or 11. And so, oh, I'm sorry. Now I'm on the afternoon one. First and second reading. Okay, here we are. So you probably all of council, I'll just make this really quick, have read the backgrounder, but I'm just going to read it really quickly. The 2022 LGLA Forum, Don Lidstone, who is a Queen's Counsel managing partner at Lidstone and Company, presented on an anti-racial discrimination and anti-racism policy, what it is, why local government should have one, and the steps in developing one. On the urging of one of their firm's employment and labor lawyers, they developed a free model anti-racial discrimination and AR policy that was shared with all attendees and were attached to the in your agenda. The model policy is intended to form the basis for local governments to create their own organizational AR policy that acknowledge the existence of racism and racial diversity of their communities and to commit to breaking down barriers and operating in a manner that is free of racism and racial discrimination. Mr. Lidstone said that the model policy begins with public acknowledgement by council to acknowledge that issues may exist in the local community and to make a formal attempt to respect everyone's dignity. While local governments may not be able to force the community to comply with human rights codes, they make strong inroads in terms of their policies and staffing and set the standard for their community. On February the 14th, Council unanimously approved a resolution to endorse MP Peter Julian's private member's Bill C-229, which was banning Symbols of Hate Act, so that all Canadians can, in his words, feel safe and secure against hate. Our endorsement of a federal bill is important and a good start, but I believe it is at least equally important for us as elected community leaders to act at the local government level. And so that is what I am making a motion for, and I'd like to speak to it if anybody cares to second it. Councillor Carlson, thank you. So as mentioned, if council decides to direct staff to draft an anti-racial discrimination and anti-racism policy that works for Summerland, one of the key things we as a council needs to do is to publicly acknowledge that racial issues may exist in Summerland. The model, as previously mentioned, is simply provided for guidance, but it is a draft of the complete policy, and it's up to council and to decide if they want to use that as it is or to make changes to it. We all recall what happened to a Summerland family in mid-July of 2020. And some of you may remember that similar hate graffiti was drawn on a community facility downtown the same evening. You'll also remember the display of a symbol of hate by a person during our celebratory parade in support of the family. Not long after this, 2 resolutions were presented at council, and one to support the family, and the second one to include language on our electronic signs to say that we are an inclusive community. Council also knows about the December 2021 hate graffiti targeting an individual in our community. Other than that last one, these incidents of racism have been very public. Summerland is not a racist town, but these very public incidents show that we have racial issues here, and these affect not only the targeted families or individuals, but the entire community. Everyone, regardless of ethnicity or skin color, deserves to feel safe in the town they call home. I know this is an uncomfortable subject, but we are community leaders, and we can do better for our residents. I welcome other comments. Councillor Carlson.
I'd just like to add that I think it's an important policy to have. I believe that in Summerland, everyone is welcome and everyone should feel welcome. So I look forward to seeing a municipal policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Oh, Councillor Councillor Trainer, Patton, and then Barkwell.
I agree with what Councillor Carlson said, and we have a lot of people in our community that come to work here from all over the world, and we just want everybody here to feel welcome. When we painted the rainbow crosswalks several years ago, I had the same feelings that you did, and that I wanted everybody to be recognized and to be made to feel welcome here. And it's not about singling anybody out. It's just really about saying you belong here and you're welcome here and we want you here. And that applies to everyone. And we have had incidents of racism here for sure. And we need to acknowledge that. And I think that this is one step that shows leadership and that just says we care, and here's what we're doing to make everybody feel good and welcome here.
Councillor Patton and then Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I agree. I think that what we need to do is it has to be as Marianne said, you know, there are aspects of it that have to be broad. I don't think that it can be a pigeonholed policy. And I think that we need something that is broad. Realistically, and I think anybody here that some of the acts that happen are from younger generations that are acting very stupidly. And perhaps the parents need, you know, the parents aren't going to be following our bylaw or our policy. So I think, but as Councillor Trainer so eloquently said, it's going to be for people coming into the district office, and it doesn't matter the color. Nothing matters as long as they know that we have a guiding policy on how we treat each other with respect and dignity. And I think that's what it comes down to. So anyway, that's just my 2 cents on it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Barkwell.
Do you know, Madam Mayor, where other communities are on this? Have there been communities that have adopted such a policy? And also, are there other model policies to consider as well as the one from Lidstone and Company that you're aware of?
Other policies, not that I am aware of. As I said, this was something that they decided to distribute for free. In response to your first question, I think it's in the... No, I guess it isn't. Yes, here it is. It is in the slide deck that he used. Here we are. Adopted in the past year include White Rock, Terrace, Port Coquitlam, Mission, Columbia, Shuswap Regional District, and places like Innisfail in Alberta. Yeah, yes. Yes. And I don't know, like, if it was verbatim. I mean, he said that some did just kind of put in their identity, but others probably changed it up. So I'm not sure if anyone had the opportunity to view the short video that, yeah. Yeah, I sent the link for the video because you can't tell it in the slide deck. You can't see the video. Councillor Van Elfen. Oh, we're past our time again.
5 more minutes.
Okay. Thank you. A seconder? All in favor? Okay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I support the concept that every person of color and creed are all treated equally and welcomed in our community. I don't have a problem with this. I probably could speak more eloquently if I wasn't falling asleep, but I support it wholeheartedly. Get her done.
All right. Any other comments? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor of this being drafted? And none opposed. Thank you. That carries. Thank you very much, Council, for your moving forward on this notice. Okay, information items. There are 5. I was going to bring forward the Moose Hide campaign, but I'm sure everybody's read it for themselves. I see that 3 of us are wearing the Moose Hide on our lapels tonight. It's an Indigenous-led grassroots movement to support, but primarily by men and boys, but all Canadians, to speak out against violence against women and children. Councillor Carlson.
I just want to make a comment that we cannot forget to acknowledge that June is Pride Month. Apparently we did not do that last year out of all the communities in the south of Okanagan, so perhaps we can keep that in mind. Thank you.
Yes, we do not allow declarations in our bylaw, the procedures bylaw, but it's certainly, I mean, that's why I asked for it to be put on the agenda, so.
It's not a declaration though. It's just
Yes.
to publicly acknowledge.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I had a question about the RDOS report, but it doesn't matter. I'll ask you separately. Is there any other correspondence that anyone else would like to bring forward? Okay, and if we could receive the correspondence for information, Councillor Traynor and Patton, all in favor? And then on to committee and commission minutes. You can see the minutes ahead before you. Climate Action, Ag Advisory, and APC. Any of the liaisons see anything glaringly out of order there? Okay, could I have someone bring those forward for information? Councillor Holmes and Van Elfen, all in favor? Great, and councillor reports. Councillor Barkwell. Great. It was fun, wasn't it, to be out with people again? Councillor Patton.
Attended the KVRS AGM last weekend, and also pleased to report that the Canyon View Crossing, all the paving is done. As council may remember, we transferred some money that we had in a reserve account. Well, that's all been used up at the Canyon View Crossing, so always good.
Nice, thank you. Councillor Traynor.
I had half my thyroid removed. I would like to thank the staff at the Penticton Regional Hospital. They are amazing, and we are so lucky to have a hospital that is as good as it is so close to us.
I would like to say the same for the Fairfield Animal Hospital in Kelowna, for gently leading Ranger across the Rainbow Bridge last weekend. Not to compare staff, your experience as a human with my experience with my dog, but he's a human too.
Just want to say, don't forget to go to the volunteer morning on the 14th, because we need you to shovel bark mulch and go down that slide, hopefully, once that bark mulch is down. And I can't wait for Memorial Park to open.
Councillor Holmes. Thank you, Councillor Van Elfen. We're done. Okay, public media comment opportunity. I don't see anyone here. Adjourn the